Conference. We are here today to present our theme, Storytelling versus Telling Stories, documenting our truer Creole history. My name is Chantel Nabon, and I am the current chair of the Board of Directors. On behalf of our 7-member board, the La Creole administration, and the entire organization, we are grateful to have you in attendance. We hope that this event, which is another opportunity for us virtually, for us to share our mission in advancing family research, providing education, and celebrating the Creole culture. You will hear from them shortly, but I wanted to acknowledge our 2021 conference organizers. That is La Creole co-founder and charter member Pat Scheck-Schneider, serving as the conference chair, and our longtime member and supporter, Dr. Elizabeth Rhodes, serving as conference programs coordinator. So much goes into planning this type of activity. So thanks for your tremendous efforts, ladies, and for leading a dynamic team to produce this year's conference. And actually, I wanted to name our conference committee and their titles and the roles that they played. So thank you, Pat, Elizabeth, and also Jennifer Ellsworth, who is our financial officer as well as registration coordinator, Mia James Alexis for publicity, Lynette Dolio Johnson for our program book, Helen Marie, our technical director, Jeannie Ayler, financial advisor. And speaking of, special thanks to Helen Marie, who is also our administrative manager as a whole, for facilitating this meeting webinar and providing our technical support and all the behind the scenes action that we so desperately need. So thank you, Helen. I'd also like to acknowledge the following institutions and individuals for sponsoring this year's conference: Xavier University of Louisiana, the Smithsonian Institute's National Museum of African American History and Culture, Dr. Elizabeth Rhodes, Joe and Pat Scheck-Schneider, Emmett and Ingrid Stanley, and Dr. Averill and Tara Sutton. I will now turn it over to our conference chair, Pat Scheck-Schneider, for her remarks.
Thank you, Chantel. Good morning, everyone. I too, on behalf of the 2021 Conference Committee, welcome all of you to La Creole 17th Annual Conference and our second Zoom presentation of this event. I will now introduce our program coordinator and moderator for this event, Dr. Elizabeth Rhodes. Dr. Rhodes has been a member of La Creole since 2006. She is a past president of La Creole, as well as having served on the board of directors. She considers herself a culturalist more than a genealogist. She has traveled extensively. She taught in K-12 schools in New Orleans, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. before moving to higher education. During her 28-year career at Xavier University of Louisiana, she served as an assistant professor, staff, and administrator. As a retiree, she has served on the board of directors of Alliance Francaise and on several local charter school boards, and currently is a board member of Community and Schools Gulf South region. I now turn the program over to Dr. Elizabeth Rhodes.
Thank you, Pat. And welcome everyone, audience and presenters. I am excited about what we hope to achieve today in telling stories, in our storytelling remarks, and in documenting our truer Creole history. We are going to proceed with the program. We'll have some visual reminders on how to keep up with the program. And we're going to have a big break in the middle so that we can take the time to have some lunch and do some other things, put the dog out, whatever we need to do. And then we'll come back again at 1:05. So because we have phenomenal presenters who are going to do some wonderful things and contribute to this mission. I have some other like technical, logistical kinds of things to mention to you. We do have two features. We have a chat feature as well as a question and answer feature. And there's also a raise hand icon, but I think that has been disabled so that presenters can have full focus without interruptions, and that it will be taken care of in the chat feature of Zoom and the question and answer feature of Zoom. And for our participants, if you want to just talk to someone in the group, because you saw them and you haven't seen them in 20 years, and you say, oh, hi, so-and-so, we went to school together, put that in the chatter, hopefully make it a private communication. But any questions and answers for the speakers, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen and all the way to the right of my screen. I don't know how it appears on yours, but that's the way we'll use those two features, okay? So chat is for chatter, question and answers is for question and answers or comments to the speakers and presenters, because that's where myself as moderator and the people who are assisting me will look for those. And we will be certain to address all of those issues either during the time period we have for the conference or afterwards, because we want to engage our audience as much as possible. So let's see what else we have to say. Oh, I would like to read you some comments that I wrote to set the tone for this conference, and what I wrote to present the idea or the concept to the board and to the membership in coming up with this particular theme or topic. Okay. The theme of our conference is storytelling versus telling stories. You may wonder how and why we chose this theme. No one questions the importance of storytelling. It's a central activity. It is critical to human development. One author went so far as to say, we as humans need food, shelter, and a story. I don't know what happened to clothing for that author, but anyway, he came up with, we need food, shelter, and a story. Many of our members as genealogists essentially do research to uncover information, and we seek the truth in doing so. But the truth is elusive. Hopefully all of you have experienced the wonder of being told a story as a young child. Many times the more fantastical, the taller the tale, the more it caught our imagination and made us want to hear more. And even if you did not experience that kind of wonderful storytelling, you certainly told some stories as a child, some more creative than others, and even more, we told some whoppers as children. We all did. Telling stories, true and otherwise, is a grown-up thing to do as well. Social media today is full of newscasters, bloggers, pollsters, influencers, and anyone with access to a device to tell any story, truth or fiction, and potentially have it immediately spread around the world. For many, this phenomena has blurred the line between fiction and truth. Contrasting narratives in storytelling, however, when told well, fill our minds, and when written, fill our bookshelves. And we need opposing viewpoints to establish our truth. Stories are powerful. Stories are powerful. I read once that explanatory narrative, that once an explanatory narrative is adopted, it is hard to undo. True or not true? Think Christopher Columbus versus Indigenous Peoples Day. Once an exploratory narrative is adopted, it is hard to undo. True or not true? Digging deeper as genealogists and storytellers do into that story of our nation's past, we often uncover things that we wish were not true, things we didn't have to deal with, especially when we're dealing with Ancestry.com. The Trail of Tears, the cruelty experienced by our enslaved ancestors, the destruction of our environment in the spirit of capitalism. But these stories must be told. Stories are powerful. Great storytellers will entertain, educate, inspire, and give us pause to think about what is truth. So today we will explore aspects of storytelling, and our presenters will tell some stories. We will hear from the Smithsonian's National African American Museum of History and Culture. They want to hear our stories and have provided a platform through which we can share our stories with others. One presenter, a member of La Creole, will tell us an intriguing story about the 7th Ward of New Orleans, where many of us have roots. Another presenter, a Xavier University faculty member, is going to tell us about storytelling, focusing on podcasts, popular podcasts. We will hear from another Xavier University professor of American and African American history, who will talk about the shifting narratives, historical narratives over time, depending on who's telling the story. We will also hear from an attorney, genealogist, and professor of law at Loyola University, who has studied and written about the intersectionality of constitutional law, race, gender, and class. He will tell stories from a legal perspective and will produce the legal documents to support it. All presenters will come together at 2:00, and we will listen to your questions and comments, and the speakers will have an opportunity to give a last comment to end La Creole storytelling session. It's this committee's hope that you as a participant will think fondly of those stories told to you by your ancestors, those that tickled your imagination and made you want to learn more, but also that as a participant, you will think about the stories you were not told. Sometimes because they were too harsh, too close to reality. Those stories are left for us to tell, and tell them we must. And as we strive for happy endings to all good stories, we are planning a musical treat from two well-known musicians to end this conference. One being a businessman with a famous name, if you like hot sausage, and he will sing for us. And a third faculty member at Xavier University of Louisiana, a very talented person, this one in music, will accompany on piano. So let's get started. Shifting papers. Our first presenter is Dr. and I may not say this name correctly, please correct me when we're finished, Doretha Williams. And Dr. Williams is the director at the Center for the Digitization and Curation of African American History, the Smith Center, part of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Smithsonian Institution, that beautiful building in Washington, D.C. The Robert F. Smith Center serves as the burgeoning digital humanities and public history forum for the NMAAHC. The Smith Center's mission is to make historical collections accessible through digitization, public programming, and interaction, and to support educational development in the museum and archives field. Sorry. Welcome, Dr. Williams. And her bio is presented here. You can read it. I've given you a quick little summary of it. Her full bio will be in the written program that we offer to everyone who has attended this conference and to all members as documentation of what we did today. So you will have that too. And all of the presenters will get one as well. So you'll have that. Okay, Dr. Williams.
Thank you. We'll start with a short video.
Sound, Helen Marie?
Where were you born? I'm sorry, what year were you born?
Okay, I believe we're going to restart.
Okay, could you please state your name?
Lee E. Williams,
And where are you from?
Sunflower, Mississippi.
Okay. Where were you born? I'm sorry, what year were you born?
Skip it.
Is it not able to play?
I'm sorry. I don't think it's able to play the sound.
Oh, the sound is working.
Oh, it was?
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, could you please state your name
Lee E. Williams,
and where are you from?
Sunflower, Mississippi.
Okay. Where were you born? I'm sorry, what year were you born?
Born in September the 28th, 1912.
Okay, there may be an issue with the sound or the video. So we'll go ahead and move on so we don't run out of time. That was actually a video of my grandfather. Age slows him down only a little. Though he is no longer the large-bodied Black man I grew up with, Lee Williams Sr. still had a powerful, crushing grip and a booming baritone voice. He was born and raised in Sunflower County, Mississippi in the early days of the 20th century. He left the South in the 30s, like thousands of African Americans during the Great Migration. His wife, my grandmother, Vivian Williams, was a native Kansan. Her parents migrated to Kansas from Arkansas shortly after the Exodus movement in the late 19th century. They settled in Kansas and raised a family of 5 boys. And at that time of the video, were living out their elderly days in Kansas City. Vivian had been tending to her flower beds, and my grandfather had been working in the garden to salvage what produce he could in the Kansas summer. Thin and gangly now, he dropped his weary body into the straight back chair and stared out the window. Granddaughter, what do you want to know? And I'd slid the videotape across the table and thumbed through my questions. And what I wanted to know was our family history. And I knew at that time what I needed to do was to capture the stories from him, from my grandma, from the great aunts and uncles and aunts who were still living, for those who were witness to being Black in Mississippi, to being Black and migrating in the early 20th century, to settling in Kansas, Toledo, Memphis, and Chicago, and all of the places we left for, and to be Black and stay in Mississippi, the family that remained in Sunflower County. And I'm glad I did. My grandfather in this video here passed away at 102 years old in 2014. My grandmother passed away. She was 103, and she passed in 2020. And they both passed on the same day, July 8th, around 7 p.m. Our family joked. Grandpa came back, circled around to get his sweetie. But the stories captured here, we now have a record of their lives. And the video you don't get to see, he talks about sharecropping. He talks about living in a small town where the church and the grocery store and the cemetery were all on the same block. He spoke about migration to Memphis, first to Memphis and then to Kansas City. He spoke about his other siblings migrating to Toledo, Ohio, and Chicago. And he talked about the other siblings who stayed in Sunflower County. So here is where the Smith Center at the National Museum of African American History and Culture lend our hand. At the Smith Center, we support digital preservation of family histories. And as I speak, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat, because at 2 p.m., the staff of the Smith Center will be available to answer questions. So please submit your questions. So we support the digital preservation of family histories. And in this first slide, you'll see one of our main programs that we call Community Curation. And we use this program to digitize still and moving images. So photographs, flat images, moving images, all your VHS tapes and cassette and film. And we use this program to digitize 4 communities as well as institutions. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But we began this service in 2017. We floated a pilot project in Baltimore, Maryland. We followed that up with Denver, Colorado in 2018. And we did our most ambitious project in Chicago in 2019, where we were in Chicago for a month. As you see there, we have the digital mobile truck that houses a lot of our moving image equipment. So people are able to digitize their VHS tapes and audio tapes. And we also have the setup to capture flat images, photographs, paper, and what have you. This is a service that is free of charge when we're in a community or when you are visiting the museum. Our next stop, of course, would have been New Orleans. And we were so sad in February 2020. We arrived, we had a great time meeting with all of you and the different organizations. We got back on the plane and the pandemic hit. But we are still on our way. Please believe that you are still on our calendar. Yay. And so that is the work we do with the community curation, where we digitize for families. All right, next slide. I wanted to show you a couple of pictures and share some stories. This is a collection of images that we captured in Denver, Colorado in 2018. And if you look at the excited man on the right hand of your, I think it's on the right side of your screen, is Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray is from Denver, Colorado, and he had brought in several plastic tubs, and he said, I have no idea what's in here. These were in my parents' house in the basement, and when we cleaned it out, he just put it in his basement. And so we're all going through it with him, you know, just surprise, surprise after surprise. And what we captured, what our fabulous photographer, Leah Jones, who will be on later, captured is a picture of Mr. Gray figuring out what he has found. And what he does is he pulls out of this plastic tub a stack of letters. And these are the love letters from his parents when his father was in the war. And as you see to the left of the screen, what we captured one of the envelopes. And then he invited us to read some of them. And so we're all here like reading these letters from his parents back and forth. And it was such a wonderful way to hear about his family, the love his mother had for his father, waiting for him to be home, giving updates on the children. So we were able to digitize a large quantity of these letters for him to be able to share to his family members, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, to read about the love that his parents had for one another. Below, you'll see a picture that was brought in as well from a young lady in the Denver area. And she just had this one large photograph. And as I looked at it, the picture, the gentleman on the far right hand in the corner was seated. That's her, one of a great grandfather. I'm not quite sure what level of generation. And so we were so excited to see this. And then to the upper left-hand corner, you see Alain Locke, who is the famed philosopher and professor at Howard University. He is up there at the top left-hand corner, and we thought, wow, this is amazing. And so we were able to contact our historians at the National Museum of African American History and Culture and talk about this photograph as well. So there are so many reasons why we do this work and capture this material for our families to share and for historical record. Next slide. We also do work where we capture the stories and in multiple sessions, right? So we started this is back in Baltimore. These are images from our Baltimore program where we captured stories from different families. And these are a couple of images provided by our fabulous Leah Jones, who we'll talk to a little bit later, from Baltimore native Deborah Mason, who was the widow of the artist Pontella Mason, who was an artist extraordinaire and muralist in Baltimore. And his artwork and his murals are displayed throughout Baltimore in Maryland. This is a conversation where she circled back to get this more information about what's going on in Baltimore and the art scene, and how he taught generations of muralists in the city, and how he also went back to do more murals, and there were commissioned murals long after he stopped working in that field. And so we were able to go back and capture more stories, capture more images, and show this story of Baltimore that a lot of people did not know, and to capture this material. Next slide. And for all of this work, we say to ourselves, so what does this mean for us to capture this material? How do we share it with our families? How do we share it with others? And so we have our platform, which we talked about a little bit earlier, our community curation platform, which you can reach at communitycuration.org. And this is a site where visitors, online visitors, can upload their experiences, thoughts, ideas, images, and what have you. And this was initiated in 2017, but when COVID hit, we decided to use this platform as a way to capture what was going on in the world during COVID-19, the pandemic, quarantine, social unrest. So we started the first campaign, Voices of Resistance and Hope, in 2020, and followed it up with a Smithsonian-wide project as well. And you can go online and see all those stories that have been uploaded. And then you all can all sign up with an account as well and upload your stories. Next slide. In addition to working with communities, we also work with institutions. These are two pictures, images from the work that we've done. The bottom one is a clip from a recording that was stored at the Sable Museum in Chicago, where we were able to capture images of Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King that had not been seen in years. And so now those are digitized, and now with the Sable Museum. The picture on the top, that image is of the inside of our fabulous mobile truck, where our media team can outfit it with all the equipment needed to digitize VHS, digitize all speeds of film, as well as any audio tapes, cassettes. And so that is what we take on the road for us for our moving images and audio. And this is also part of the Great Migration Home Movie Project, where pre-COVID, people were able to come to the museum and drop off their VHS tapes and other home movie material for it to be digitized. And when we're on the road, and actually when we're on site as well, there is always a looped version of all the images that we have digitized for families. And it's just fun to see all the families in those videos throughout the museum. Next slide. We also do a program where we digitize for institutions as well. And there are several of the institutions listed on the screen that we do. We now do those programs similar to our community curation program, but a few of those collections are also shared digital assets on our the Smithsonian websites as well. And this is a great way to honor the product and the work of Black filmmakers, as well as collections at other institutions. And we've digitized at the Margaret Walker Center in Jackson State. And one of the interesting collections is the Piney Woods School Oral History recordings. So we continue to do that work as well with institutions, because we know institutions also need that support as well. Next slide. Oh, that is into the slide. That is our ending slide. So those are things that we do to make sure that we're helping communities, institutions, and families record and digitally preserve their material. I wish we could have seen my grandfather's piece. He was a wonderful man and was always up to tell a story of our family history, and he's so missed. And actually this morning when I first played to review it, I had to take a moment. I hadn't seen it in a while, but his voice in that recording is still so strong and still so wonderful to hear. And I'm thoroughly grateful that I still have it. And that collection in particular is the collection that our media team digitized for me and put in a retrievable format. So I'm grateful for my team for that as well. So thank you so much. I hope you have questions or concerns. A little bit later at 2 p.m. we'll all be online to answer those for you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Thank you for introducing us to your grandfather. It was nice meeting D.E. Williams, even for a brief moment. And I understand you hold those stories close to your heart.
Yes, I truly do. Thank you.
I am also so excited, and all of us are so excited to hear that we are still on your calendar and that hopefully you will bring that big van down to New Orleans so that we, along with everybody else in this city that you entertained 2 years ago now, and wowed us. Yes, 2 years. So we're hoping that, October is a good time for you all, but we'll see next year. And are so excited about what you offer to our community, to our larger community. And thank you very much for this presentation. Her full staff, I think in a cohort of 7 people are going to be in the question and answers. So if you have specific questions about photography and digitization, or, I think there's, well, no, I answered that question. So we've got lots of things and opportunities ahead of us with our partnership with the Smith Center. So thank you very much for that, for the community curation project, and also for making us still part of your mission. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to move on now to our next presenter, Lynette Dolly-Johnson, Stories from the 7th Ward. So Lynette, many of our members know Lynette. She's part of our group. She is a cultural historian, writer, and digital media producer focused on inclusive storytelling, especially pertaining to local history narratives. She does a wonderful job. She is a founding member of Shift Collective, which is a nonprofit that works with cultural heritage organizations to better engage, collaborate with, and reflect their local communities. Lynette's prior career was as a newspaper journalist, art director, graphics editor at the Times-Picayune, the Journal News in New York, and the LA Times. So in 2020, she worked with the Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans to help create the A.P. Touro Cultural District, and in the New Orleans Historic 7th Ward, that nice little treasure of the 7th Ward. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about the 7th Ward. And she's co-founder of the local public radio show, Music Inside Out with Gwen Tompkins. She is a longtime member of La Creole, and we are happy to hear from her this morning. Lynette?
Good morning. As Elizabeth said, I'm looking at the 7th Ward neighborhood as a storytelling opportunity. When we were kids, as Elizabeth mentioned, we often wanted to discern between what somebody was making up versus the stories that were factual and could be of real help to us as we learn to navigate the world. I won't tell you who this is. You might be able to make a guess. But what is the distinction I make between storytelling and telling stories? I distinguish between stories that strive to describe who we all are, the places we live, the events that have shaped our world as inclusively and in as true a way as is possible, versus propagating stories that selectively ignore or distort the facts about certain people, places, and events. The problem for us as family historians, as researchers and academics, and even just as family members who are interested in the real story to the degree that we can get it, is that both made up and factual stories can become dominant narratives, can become dogma. I've been studying Afro-Creole history in Louisiana for a time now, and especially of late looking at New Orleans neighborhoods and at the stories those landscapes tell about Afro-Creole history. The 7th Ward historically has been a culturally and racially mixed neighborhood that by the mid-20th century came to be dominated by Black Creoles who were family-oriented, entrepreneurial, fiercely Catholic, skilled tradesmen, influential musicians, pioneering educators, civil rights activists, essentially people who were both fun-loving and no nonsense at the same time. Claiborne Avenue, the neighborhood's main thoroughfare, at one time was said to be the thriving center of Black commerce in New Orleans. So in thinking about how to better document our Creole history, I'm looking at the neighborhood level, the 7th Ward, and storytelling there, particularly challenges, sharing our history, moving forward. As we work to document a truer history, we find ourselves up against at least 2 major problems in the historical record. This photo represents the result of one of the problems. It's the same view of Claiborne Avenue, 65 years apart. And you can see what we had versus what we have now. And that brings up the topic of omission or erasure, the exclusion of people, places, events from the story. Stories are not inclusive, are almost completely one-sided, from only one person's or group's perspective, or elements of history are erased, intentionally destroyed. The federal government's urban renewal movement visited the 7th Ward in Treme in the 1960s and created devastating losses along Claiborne Avenue and in pockets of the neighborhoods. This is an example of erasure in the form of eminent domain as buildings were seized and destroyed to construct the elevated I-10 expressway. And in general, urban renewal created this nomadic underclass of people who were displaced. And then there's distortion or false narrative, exaggerated stories that simply don't reflect or don't even intend to reflect the lived reality of people and places and events. This can be done to benefit or gain advantage for one viewpoint. The federal government's practice of redlining kicked in starting during the Depression. And this practice regulated mortgage lending, including interest rates and equity buildup. The government created these color-coded maps of every metro area in the US with the safest neighborhoods colored green, according to lending risk, and the riskiest colored red. A neighborhood was colored red if African Americans lived in it, even if it was solid middle-class neighborhood of single-family homes, as the 7th Ward largely was at that time. But you can see the 7th Ward was colored red. And so we get the distorted view that because of their race, African Americans were poor risks for investment, baked into a practice that ended up starving Black neighborhoods of resources. So regarding documenting and sharing our history in as true a way as is possible, yes, we have challenges, but what are the opportunities for storytelling in a place like the 7th Ward? We can preserve our built cultural heritage. This can be done by practicing historic architectural preservation, and we can ask the question, what can we learn about our past from those buildings? We can use the neighborhood landscape to interpret our own histories. We can ask, what is there that we can illuminate? Mark Roudinet, along with a team of dedicated historians, including Elizabeth Rhodes, worked hard to get this marker to Black achievement placed in the French Quarter. These things won't happen unless we push for them. And we can protect and promote our intangible cultural heritage. And to do that, we honor and elevate our ancestors' legacies. We safeguard our existing cultural institutions. We conserve our community values, cultural traditions, customs, and practices. But first, historic preservation. We practice this not just for the architecture, but for the stories those buildings can tell. We look at Straight University, for example, which was located in the 7th Ward. After the Civil War, students from all over the South moved to New Orleans to attend Straight universities, their law school, their medical school. The Preservation Resource Center restored the original Straight University boarding house on North Claiborne, which is the last building standing associated with any of the first 3 African-American universities founded in New Orleans after the Civil War. The main school building had been built around the corner on Esplanade Avenue, but it's no longer there. Seeing this remaining house, the boarding house, begs a question: what happened to the main building? It's reported that as Union soldiers left New Orleans in 1877, arsonists set the main campus building on fire. And that's how we lost that building. The 7th Ward's fragile Perseverance Hall on North Villery Street was built by a group of free people of color in 1853, originally as a Masonic lodge, but it became a major music hall known for its concerts and dances for racially mixed audiences, interesting at the time. It's a humble building, but it looms large. Its story is that it is a place of major significance because it's one of the very few surviving venues where the earliest of the world's jazz greats practiced their craft and shaped jazz. Most people from the 7th Ward know the Autocrat Club primarily as a hall for parties and wedding receptions, but the club from the beginning was civic and community oriented. And in addition to social events, hosted civil rights meetings. It maintained a lending library for members when public libraries were segregated. And it even served as a sending off point for colored soldiers during the First World War. And for family researchers as well as scholars, ordinary places like our homes can tell us much about how people lived, about family dynamics, about the times people lived in. We can look at a photograph of this little house and see the close quarters, it's small, and imagine the family interactions. This was the Moore family home. Deacon John, Sybil Kine, Charles Moore, the musical Moores, the literary Moores. In Deacon John's family, 13, count them, 13 people lived in half of a shotgun double on North Tonty Street in the 7th Ward. So for the Moores, as Deacon John describes it, there was an inherent lack of privacy built into that, but there was also a forced but ultimately beneficial intimacy and spirit of sharing. Deacon John doesn't display hard times or trouble, but he describes a happy childhood in a house filled with music and laughter. He also describes the house as if it was a character in his story, with chickens running around in the backyard. They had chicken for dinner every Sunday, and as an influential force in the family dynamic. I refer to Deacon John because his story illustrates an important point about the family dynamic as impacted by its dwelling, which is another reason we should try to save these dwellings. They teach us. We should present our historical interpretations. When we look around the landscape, what intentional reflections of the past do we see? What is represented, and perhaps more importantly, what is not? Historical interpretation at its best is a thoughtful effort to represent or explain past events based on firsthand or scholarly sources. We have the opportunity to interpret our histories. What can we say and show? An exceptional example of historical interpretation in the 7th Ward is the installation that honors Dr. Thelma Coffee Butte, the first Black woman to practice medicine in New Orleans. She lived in a shotgun home in a part of the neighborhood called The Cut. Her house was demolished, but Nucor Inc., a neighborhood nonprofit, worked with Tulane University Small Center to build a commemorative monument that mimics the frame of her shotgun house. It's one element of a larger planned wellness site that will include a garden and educational programming. Dr. Butte contributed to the health and well-being of patients in New Orleans for more than 30 years, practicing at Flint Goodrich Hospital. The outdoor wellness hub is a fitting tribute to her. And we have the A.P. Touro Civil Rights Memorial, which pays tribute to Touro and 15 other civil rights leaders in a pocket park featuring a cast bronze statue of Touro, who lived in the 7th Ward, raised a family there. A.P. Touro was a key attorney in legal challenges to Jim Crow laws. He directed the most substantial blows to racial segregation in Louisiana's history. This memorial has been around for about 25 years and is one of the most prominent displays of historical interpretation in the 7th Ward. 7th Ward. The site's currently undergoing refurbishment, which is really important because once we establish these types of memorials, we've got to take care of them. Public artworks attract tourists who come for festivals or visit as part of bus or walking tours, but they're most important to remind people in the neighborhood of our history. One example is the Sidney Bechet mural, which depicts the world-renowned jazz clarinetist who grew up in the 7th Ward and is painted across one entire side of a shotgun house on North Claiborne Avenue. And on Claiborne, on the neutral ground, the concrete pillars holding up the expressway tell stories about the cultural, musical, educational, civic contributions and achievements of people of color in New Orleans through the murals that are painted by local artists. We also need to protect and promote our intangible cultural heritage. We need to honor and elevate our ancestors' legacies and achievements. We should look to celebrate some of our lesser known or forgotten cultural figures. Lena Richard was born in New Rhodes, Louisiana in 1892. She grew up in the 7th Ward on North Durbany Street, and she was a trained chef, a cookbook writer, restaurant catering business owner, frozen food entrepreneur, TV host, cooking school teacher. She's credited with tearing down racial and economic barriers in the heart of the Jim Crow South. In 1949, she hosted her own cooking show on WDSU TV in New Orleans, a first for an African American. The show became so popular that WDSU began airing it twice weekly on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And while Lena Richard was enormously influential across the food industry in the mid-20th century, today her story remains largely forgotten by both New Orleans and the nation. By the way, she was very successful, but not without struggle, of course, at that time. One of her cookbooks was released with neither her name nor her photo on the cover. Ferdinand Rousseff, Louisiana's first licensed African-American architect, grew up on Columbus Street in the 7th Ward. Most of his commissions are interconnected with his daily work for racial equality and social justice. Working through the channels of the profession that inspired him, he advanced day-to-day changes in the status quo of the African-American built environment. It would be difficult to be more civically engaged than Rousseff while also maintaining an architectural practice and chairing university departments. Those are the words of historian Laura Blocker, who researched Rousseff. By the way, Rousseff was head of the Department of Fine Arts at Xavier University in 1934, among many other positions at other places. Those are only 2 legacies related to the 7th Ward that we can elevate. The question is, what are others? We also need to safeguard our existing cultural institutions and document lost ones. People seeing this puts a smile on your face to see the Creole Vaucresson sausage company returning to the 7th Ward. The Vaucresson family started their business in 1899. In the 1970s, Robert Sonny Vaucresson bought the property at 1800 St. Bernard Avenue in the 7th Ward and began running a sausage processing operation there in 1983. The flooding following Hurricane Katrina substantially damaged the building, which sat unoccupied and rotting for more than 15 years until Robert's son, Vance, made the right connections to put the rehabilitation project on track. Vaucresson's is a cultural treasure that will help re-energize that part of the neighborhood. We need to conserve, lastly, our community values, cultural traditions, customs, and practices. The construction of the interstate may have caused us to stumble a bit in terms of practicing our traditions, but it in no way put a halt to long-lived cultural practices. And so moving forward, how can we become better storytellers and more discerning interpreters of history? For those of us who value documenting Black history, Black Creole history in New Orleans, what is happening now in the 7th Ward is very important. The 7th Ward is a historically significant neighborhood that today is very much struggling with issues of crime and blight brought on by decades of disinvestment, among other problems, but signs of life and investment in the form of new mixed-use developments and historic building renovations are popping up. So we have a chance as historians, as family researchers, with perhaps a bigger spotlight now, to shape the narrative of that neighborhood. So for family researchers in particular, because your stories are often at the core of the body of knowledge about our historically significant people, places, and cultural practices, I would say research, dig. Don't rely only on what you've heard, don't rely only on what you can see. Talk to people. Avoid making assumptions based on limited knowledge. Ask, what else? Who or what is missing? As family researchers, we shouldn't draw conclusions only based on family lore. Dig. Fatima Sheikh, our beloved intrepid 7th Ward writer, journalist, and professor, went all the way to a remote village in India, digging for her family's truer story. God bless her. We can't all swing that, but we can do our due diligence. Sometimes family lore is on point, sometimes it misses the point. Sometime in the mid-19th century, a branch of my Dolio family seemed to disappear. The line just stopped, and suddenly in the records, there was no more information about them. Many of us know what that usually means for Creoles of color, that they likely changed their name and passed for white. But I found something curious when I lived out west in California. Even though the Dolios were historically a New Orleans phenomenon, we're all related to one another through this city. I found there were Dolios with Spanish first names, Pedro, Juan, in Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico. I was talking with historian Mary Gaiman several years ago, and she told me that she found Dolio males on the manifests for passage to Mexico in the 19th century. They were likely part of the exodus to Mexico to escape the increasingly harsh racial environment in Louisiana. Apparently, there's a Dolio diaspora that the family never knew about and that we need to investigate. That will lead us away from some of our assumptions about the family line into our truer story, which is that we likely have Mexican cousins. Tell the whole story. Your family deserves to know. One thing we have to be careful of is that in attempting to tell truer, more complete stories, we do not leave out the uncomfortable parts. At the family level, I'm proud of my family's accomplishments in architecture, music, business, but there's also troubling stuff in our past, like this 1939 headline about an uncle who apparently pushed his family to the limit and ended up being killed by his common law wife as she tried to protect her teenage son. That's not pretty, it's a mess, really, but we've got to understand the troubles as well as the accomplishments. And finally, gain control of narratives about us. Don't give up until our stories are represented fairly. I close with the Royal Brooks story. Some of you probably know. It's not a Seventh Ward story, but it was a familiar one, unfortunately, in the Jim Crow South. However, it proves that we do not have to accept stories we know to be untrue. On February 27th, 1948, in Gretna, a Black man named Royal Brooks was boarding a bus across the river from New Orleans. A white woman ahead of him put her fare in the slot and then realized she had boarded the wrong bus. Mr. Brooks gave her his nickel, saying her payment could instead cover his fare. This angered the bus driver, who hailed a police officer. The officer walked Brooks away from the bus stop and shot him twice in the back, killing him. The police officer was acquitted by an all-white jury. This is 1948. Royal Brooks' family would not let the case rest. 7 decades later, the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project at Northeastern University took up the case to clear Brooks's name. And at a commemorative event in 2018, the Gretna mayor read a formal proclamation apologizing to Brooks and his family for his unjust death. Further, the family pushed for a historical marker at the site, and the Louisiana State Office of Tourism approved it. The marker documents who Royal Brooks was. He was considered a very kind man, and what really happened to him. The historical marker for him is the first of its kind in Gretna, a marker honoring the memory of an African-American citizen, and his great-granddaughter had a beautiful quote: "By offering to trade nickels to help a white woman who had gotten on the wrong bus, he showed society, however briefly, that another way, one of love and charity, could be possible, even in a time of hate and injustice." I end with this image of the trees that do remain on North Claiborne Avenue, even today, as a symbol of hope and inspiration. Thank you.
Okay, I could just about cry. Thank you, Lynette. The Seventh Ward is close to a lot of our hearts, and you told a wonderful story about it. I could see our audience saying, "Oh, my mom, I was born by Dr. Boutte. Dr. Boutte delivered me. You know, my mom or my dad, well, my mom went to straight business school." We know those landmarks. Some of those stories, some of us did not know. Thank you. Thank you. I don't have any other words. You brought it home for us and pumped us up. A beautiful presentation. And just as a matter of housekeeping, I am looking at the questions and answers, and they will be addressed later on in the presentation. And now we're going to hear from another one of our presenters, and Monica. I would like to introduce Monica. She's talking about podcasting as storytelling, and she has very definitive remarks about how we may proceed. And hopefully by the time the Smith Center staff from the National Museum of African American History and Culture come down, we may have some podcasts for them to upload for our section of that website, the community curation website. Monica, you ready?
Well, I don't know. Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth Rhodes. There's this old saying, you try not to follow children and pets. I'm going to add to the list, try not to follow Lynette as a speaker. Amazing. And for someone who moved to this city about 30 years ago to cover it in news, I'm just amazed at all that you uncovered in less than 20 minutes. That's just amazing. Thank you for that. And even if you weren't born here or grew up in the 7th Ward, there's still that connection. So thank you for all of that. Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Dr. Rhodes. And I'm going to just put this into 3 parts for all of us who are here participating or panelists. What can we do to go forward? What is your role as a storyteller as it relates to being the gatekeeper, as it relates to being the producer and the actual podcaster? In other words, putting it out there. So that's what I'd like to talk to you about. And of course, if you have questions, put it in the chat and we'll get to it this afternoon if possible. There's a lot to podcasting, a lot of things people don't know or would like to know. So we're definitely going to work on that. So your role as the gatekeeper, what does that mean? Your role as a producer and your role as the podcaster, making sure that this project gets out. So a little bit about podcasting, and I checked my phone. I probably have 12 podcasts that I try to listen to on a regular basis. Sometimes some jump the line. So it's so easy to download podcasts. It's so easy to have it as part of your daily routine or your weekly routine. So what does it mean nowadays to be part of this growing podcasting universe? There's an organization, they do a lot of research. It's called Edison Research and Triton Digital. And every year for the last several years, they have been conducting surveys on online audio listening, in particular smartphones, how that's all working together. And in the spring, I think April of this year, they released their latest, and it showed that 80 million Americans listen to podcasts every week, and that the podcasts themselves are getting very, very diverse, the podcasters. So I'm just going to give you just a quick thumbnail. If you'd like more details, I know you're all researchers and you like that. But there's also the state of podcast listening for 2021. So you got 80 million Americans 12 and over listening to podcasts on a daily basis. And when you break that down, this is what it looks like. Basically, the majority of those listening to even monthly podcasts are primarily white. Latino is 16%. African Americans make up 13% of that number. So it is growing. So at one point, you had less than half of the population, 12 and plus, listening to podcasts. Now the number is closer to 57. So it's only going to get bigger. It's only going to be there. So what do we take from all of that? And one of the things that we can take from that is Dr. Rhodes says, who is telling the story, and tell the stories we must. So that is a clarion call to each and every one of us to consider telling the story and using podcasting as a way to be storytelling. So I want to get a little bit into your role as a gatekeeper. First of all, what is that? When we study mass communication, when we look at some of the theories, one of them is gatekeeping. And I think Mr. Warren Bell is still on. I know he was on earlier, and he was the man, blame him and not blame me, who hired me to come into this market many, many years ago. So he hired me as a reporter. He was the news director at the time. He was the gatekeeper as it relates to the stories we would cover, who would cover the stories. So he had a lot of power in decision making. So what we complain about, rightfully so, is that the gatekeepers in traditional media don't show the stories that reflect our stories, what we want. So when you become a podcaster, a storyteller and podcaster, you are now the actual gatekeeper. You get to decide, you get to get all of this information, and you get to figure out and select this information and put that out there. So I like to say, if you don't like what you don't see, create it. Create it. Podcasting is a way to create what's lacking. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of podcasts and how formats, but there's a way to tell the story. And, I'm so amazed with Dr. Williams and your grandfather. And I would just love to hear that voice more and more and more. So many of us have those stories. As you mentioned, Dr. Rhodes, all of us are saying, this doctor delivered my mom or delivered me. What are we going to do? What is the container for some of these stories? So podcasting is a way to do that. So it's one of the ways that we can look at the challenges of our stories not being told or partially told, or not be more stories out there that are not the truth. We can use the podcast as that container, as that vehicle in which to do that. So of course, there's some challenges, and we'll talk about it. It's really not cost prohibitive to do a podcast compared to buying a TV station, or compared to buying a newspaper, or compared to buying a radio station. There are some things that you could do at a minimum to get it going. But as the gatekeeper, you get to identify certain elements. And I'm going to talk about being a producer. So see yourself now as the one who said, no more am I going to just complain about what I don't see. It doesn't mean that I won't hold others accountable for telling stories that are inaccurate, or telling stories that are only half, or not even telling the stories. But what is my role to do that? So become the gatekeeper when it comes to podcasting. So what about becoming the producer? One of the things I love is to put together a show. And you are all, in a way, producers, because you're finding a way, you're keeping certain stories around, certain stories alive. So how do you put your producer hat on and say, what is missing? What can I bring to the storytelling conversation? What can I unearth? What can I dig deep, as Lynette talked about, to tell this story? So as a producer, you get to say, what's missing and what can I bring? And when you answer those two questions, now you begin to become the producer of the show. You get to do things like pick a format. What's the format that you want? And there's so many storytelling formats that you can use. It can be as simple as having a recorder and letting Uncle Joe talk. It can be an actual storytelling where you maybe go back and tell the story of the gentleman who was killed in Gretna, and actually reconnect and recreate that story as one of those serial podcasts. You can do that as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that you have for your podcast. You can have a show that's a monologue. It's just solo voice, hopefully a compelling speaker, because as my late coworker, the late C.J. Morgan used to say, you can be anything on the air, funny, controversial, just don't be boring. Just don't be boring. So you can create a show where you're the solo host, or you could have a co-host. You could create a show as the producer where you are interviewing. You can interview, we have so many great historians here, so many great genealogists here. You could do a show on how do you trace your family's roots. There's so many ideas for shows that you would have to say, okay, I could be all over the map here, but I'm going to focus my story. So you could have an interview story, a show where you interview people. You could also, you could have conversations, I mentioned before, with a co-host. Or you can actually put together a show where you narrate. You get all this great footage that you have, and you say, even if it's audio, because remember, for the most part, podcasting is audio. But can you remember? And I'm struck by, I think, it was Dr. Williams when she talked about how when she would go there to talk to him and bring the recorder, and he would just say, "What do you want to know, granddaughter?" You can set all of that up, even on audio. So you could have, instead of doing a straight interview show, you could have parts where you narrate it and play the clips. Can you imagine how engaging that is? Can you imagine how that's going to capture the attention of the person who is listening to that? So a lot of ways to tell the story in podcasting. You also want to determine, who is this for? Who is the audience for this show? And sometimes the answer may be, it's just my family, right? It's just to make sure that the stories live on, that the truth is told, the good and the bad and the ugly and the ones that make us sad. You can determine that I'm going to create this for a smaller audience, or you can create it for a larger audience, or your association. There's so many ways to identify who is this ideally for. So once you figure out where's the need that you can fill, who is this for, and then the format, and then you make other decisions like, how long is it? Is it going to be a weekly show? I wouldn't recommend a daily show because that's a lot of commitment. But there are a lot of podcasts, particularly genealogy podcasts out there, that are monthly. I think it may need to be a little bit more regular than that, but I would prefer that you start off doing a monthly show. And then as demand and interest and bandwidth on your part grows, then you can say, okay, I'm going to turn this into a weekly show. Because a lot of podcasts start, but they never finish. And sometimes if you can make it 15 to 20 shows, there's a lot of commitment there. What other people do when they're producing the show before they actually launch it, they will have in the can, pre-recorded, ready to go, already edited, a number of shows. So when they launch it, let's say you launch a show January 6th, 2022, well, you have worked during that off season, putting it all together so that when you launch, you can launch 2 and 3 shows at a time, or you can definitely have enough shows to go a month or 2 months. So you're not scrambling like, what am I going to do to get this show together? So as the producer, you can make some of those decisions as well. And then I'm going to talk about your role as the gatekeeper, your role as the producer, and of course you're going to make some decisions. Who are you going to interview? You're going to schedule that. I always tell people, don't try to make it an Oprah production right away. You know, maybe 1 guest as opposed to 5 guests, because that way it's easier to manage. Or you want to grab maybe perhaps all of your interviews. Maybe you're going to go somewhere for the holidays and everybody's gathered. You might want to bring your recorder and start grabbing some interviews. And then I'll talk a little bit later about how you can edit and put all of that together. So stories are everywhere. Your role as the podcaster has never been more needed. So don't say what's not happening. What can you do to create that? And so finally, if just a few more minutes, I want to talk about your role as the podcaster itself. You're the one who's going to make sure that this show, this podcast, sees the light of day, right? Some things to keep in mind. You'll need to figure out, well, do I have the equipment? And it's audio. So nowadays, people really want good audio. At one time, it was all internet and it didn't sound good and the music was bad. And so now you have to make sure, do I have enough of the equipment to make sure that it sounds good? So I'm going to show you a couple of things. I'm just going to bring it to you. Mics are important, but you don't have to spend a whole lot of money. Can you see this, Dr. Rhodes? Is that okay? Yeah, great. This is one of the mics that you may see a lot when people are actually doing video podcasts, because again, it's just pictures and a video and you can just take the audio out. So this one is called Blue Yeti. It's under $100 and it actually is connected to your USB. So you get to have a nice sound under $100. This one I really, really like. It's called a Rode, R-O-D-E. And this one is a mini USB. Again, you connect it and you put it right into your computer. So let's say you're back for the holidays and you have Uncle Joe and Aunt Sarah and Grandma, she's 99, and you want to gather all that. You can have this with you and you put it down and you have it hooked into your computer and it's not obtrusive. You know, people like, they forget it's there and they just share all of these great stories. And then again, you just connect it. Other things that you can get include a mic stand or a windscreen so you don't pop your peas. You can also get other things, but if you just want the basic, you're going to want a mic, going to want a headphone. You're going to want some editing software equipment. There's some free things out there. You can pay for a license, but you can do audacity.com. It is free and easy as pie. My Xavier students use it, and some of them don't even, hadn't had any experience with it. It's just easy. So let's just say you go out for the holidays, you grab all of those great interviews, right? You got 5 or 6 great interviews, but you want to tell more of a narrative where you're going to lead into it, play the sound bite, maybe have a little music, license-free music that you can use, or you need to edit that somewhere. So that's an editing software that's pretty easy to use that you can put your show together. Some other things that you'll need, I talked about your mic, also your recording software. Then you're going to need, and this is getting to the podcaster part, how will people hear it, right? If you decide to put it on Spotify, or you want to put it on Apple or Google, those are some host sites. And there's a nominal fee usually for that. There's some free ones, but you don't really get much in the way of that. So you may want to look at maybe spending $10 a month or $15 a month or whatever it costs to host it, because you don't want to put it on your own site. That's going to pretty much crash your site if the file is 30 minutes or an hour. So what you may want to consider is going ahead to get a host site where you can host your show, and they'll push it out to your audience. People always ask me I'm going to watch my time, that, well, how do I make money? That's not always the easiest thing, right? Unless you get a nice contract from one of the iHeart or some of the others and they put you on. Figure out that this is filling a need, and grow your audience, grow awareness, promote it, use it perhaps in addition to something else. Because as I mentioned, see podcasting and storytelling as a container, as another way to tell the stories that need to be told. And it's not that hard. The main thing I find that people, they get started, they have a big idea, but they can't sustain it. Start small and be consistent with it. If it's a weekly show, you want to have it ready to go. As let's say every Tuesday you release your show, or subscribers can get it every Tuesday, get a new episode, make sure that there's something there. And also before you launch with it, try to have several shows already done or in the can. So that's my basic how to get a podcast done, using storytelling, you as the gatekeeper, you as the producer, making those decisions, and you as the one responsible for getting it out there. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Dr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Monica Pierre. And I would just like to say, first of all, thank you for making connections to the other presenters. That when that happens naturally, that is just a wonderful thing. So thank you for those wonderful remarks. I'd also like to say that if there are Xavier students creating podcasts, now I know they want to make money off of their podcasts, but if there's some exemplary ones, I'm just thinking in advance in the future that we might want to collaborate on something like that.
Oh,
La Creole.
absolutely.
We're looking for interns at Xavier, and we've had one intern, for faculty to identify interns that we could use toward a particular goal. So I'm talking out of turn because I am no longer on the board, but or in the executive staff, but I just think that'll be nice. So
well, we'll have a conversation. Thank you so much.
You gave us the ABCs and the XYZs on how to do this. We, as an organization, we're thinking about doing it, but we have to think really, really carefully about it based on, all the other things by our bylaws we are obliged to do. So thank you very much for making this a very practical thing. Yeah, you showed us those steps.
Thank you.
Okay, if I look at the schedule, we all could possibly be getting a little hungry now. I'm getting all kinds of messages on my phone that I hope to address. We'll get to the chats and the Q&As later on. I think now's the time for us to take a break and have a hot sausage sandwich, a bowl of gumbo, some fried oysters, or charbroiled oysters. I'm sorry for those people who don't live here, but that's, what we can do here in New Orleans. You got to come here to experience it. Let's take a break And we will come back at 1 o'clock to hear Dr. Senegal DeQueer and to hear Mitch Crusto. And you can just keep this link open, right, Helen, on your computer, where you can stop the video and stop your voice. Is that the way we should do this, Helen? Or should we expect people to come back in? Helen?
Yes, I was
Okay.
trying to avoid putting my microphone on.
Oh,
Yes, we will pause the we will pause the recording, everyone, but you are welcome to leave the link open and just come back at 1 o'clock and we will resume. But yeah, the meeting will stay open and I'll just pause the recording.
all right, folks. You might have to take a little nap like I might have to do. See y'all in a little bit. Thank you. She wants. Good. She's recording. Helen, I'll start unless you want me to do otherwise. Okay, just got a text from her. She says that's fine. So I hope you all had a nice lunch. I sure did. And I heard from a board member of La Creole who said he was looking deep in his freezer for some hoghead cheese, which he had to make sure he found so he could have something to eat. And I just ate a praline, not a plarine, like my grandchildren say, to boost up my energy because I needed that. So I hope you all had a good break and a good lunch. Welcome back. If there are new participants who were not able to check out the morning sessions, make sure that you take a look at the recording that we will send you. We'll send you a link and you can check that out. We heard about preserving our family histories. We heard about stories from the 7th Ward and about podcasting as storytelling and how to do it successfully. So it was very interesting. There's a lot of chatter in the chat feature, and there are several questions and answers already, some of which have already been answered by our morning panelists. So, panelists or speakers or presenters, if you take a look at the Q&A, those of you that have already presented, you might find that there's something that you could address specifically to that person who asked the question. But don't feel pressured to do it. And certainly Dr. Senecal DeQueer and Professor Crusto, you're going to have some waiting for you, I'm sure, after you finish your presentation. So
We may want to give, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, we may want to leave about 2 minutes, just since we said 1:05. We're technically a couple of minutes early. I wouldn't want anybody to miss the beginning of the next presentation.
Okay. So what am I going to do? Sing for you all in 5 minutes?
Go for it.
That is grabbing. I can't believe it. Okay, I'm going to sing a little French song for y'all. Well, yeah. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to spare myself. If you all can bear hearing this again, I'll say this much to you all to avoid dead space, like my friend Mitch Crusto reminded me of, dead time. We had, at one point, I counted 49 participants. Typically, we have more than that. There were some people who reported technical difficulties and not being able to get into video. Some not understanding that we purposefully did not put all participants in video because this is a webinar and it's not just a free-for-all party. If we had 49 screens up and 49 audios going, if we didn't technically mute everybody, our speakers wouldn't have an uninterrupted time to talk. So we did that on purpose, and we had to explain that to people over the break. We had one participant as far away as Haiti or IT, like they say it. So that's interesting. And we had members from other states as well. But I think this person, I'm not sure if the person from Haiti is a member or a non-member, but certainly a participant.
Not yet, maybe.
Yeah, maybe a member in the future. Okay, so they missed all my snarky remarks at the beginning about hoghead cheese, and and pralines. But we're going to have a survey at the end, and we'll share the data from the survey with the presenters. So know that we can get back to you on that. I think it's a quick, short survey, Helen, or several questions. Or what?
About 5, I think 5 or 6 questions, very short.
We're going to ask all participants to do it. We can't do it until the end of the seminar. But we did hear from a lot of people over the break about how interesting and wonderful the presentations have been so far. So have I eaten up enough time? It's 1:04.
I think we're good.
1 more minute. Okay, broadcasters. Monica, what do you do when you have 1 minute?
Oh, you feel, and so I think you've reiterated already, correct? So
Yeah.
Gotta sing that song, Elizabeth.
Okay, all right. Mon cher cousin, mon cher cousine, mon aime la cuisine, mon mange bien,
keep going.
mon bois de vin, c'est pas coûter moi rien. My boy cousins and my girl cousins, we enjoy wonderful cuisine, good eating. We eat good food. We eat good, we drink good, and we don't have a care in the world. C'est pas coûter moi rien. So that's my little French song. Thank you very much. That's my filler. Taught to me by my great aunt, Fatima Sheikh's mother. The author Fatima Sheikh, who we've referred to earlier, who got the recipient yesterday. I could tell you all that and it'll be for some members who couldn't make it at the annual meeting. We gave out 2 awards. We gave a Founders Award and a Recognition Award. We recognized Marva Arsenault for our Recognition Award, and we gave Fatima Sheikh our, well, it's our award, the organization's award, but the board members, the original members of La Creole, the charter members, get to vote on someone. And because she has written this book that called Economy Hall, and I have the book on the shelf over there, but anyway, and there's a subtitle. But the book got wonderful Kirkus reviews. It got the Louisiana Book Award, and Fatima got an award from the Louisiana Endowment of the Humanities for the book. Fatima and I grew up right down the street from one another, and she grew up as my sister, so I'm just so proud of her. Okay, so that was a little unapologetic plug for the book, Economy Hall, Brotherhood. Did anybody have the book on the shelf right away? Oh, look, there it is. Would you read it to us, Chantel, please? The subtitle?
Oh, okay. The Hidden History of the Free Black Brotherhood.
Yeah. A very important book, and she's been down here promoting the book, and we're proud of her. She's one of our own. She's a board member. Okay, so welcome everyone back to the conference. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Sorry you missed me singing and talking about food, but you know that's the way it goes sometimes. We've had considerable interest in these sessions this morning, and you can look at them at your leisure when we send you a link in the next 2 or 3 days. I think Helen usually gets those out to our membership and to the participants of the conference. So feel free to look at that and be informed if you missed the morning sessions. We're looking forward to 3 very exciting afternoon sessions from a history professor, from a law professor, and we'll close with a bit of entertainment. And we will have a question and answer session. So don't forget also that we will have a survey just before the close of the meeting, and after the official close of the conference, we will have the survey that'll automatically pop up, and we just ask all participants to answer those questions. Presenters, feel free to peruse the questions posted in the Q&A in preparation for answering them. And I will try to moderate that question and answer session. But if you want to jump in there, I don't mind you interrupting me in the question and answer session to make sure you get some points across if you see something that I may have overlooked. I think we have a half an hour. I think we can fill that time with a lot of the questions. Well, I'm looking right now, I have 12 in the queue. We've answered some, so there's still 12 in the queue. I think we're ready to get started. And if that's the case, Hearing no objections, I would like to introduce you, no, not Mitch, Helen. We got to go to Charlene now. There we go. Charlene Senegal de Queer, and I'm going to spell her name for you, S-H-A-R-L-E-N-E. That's for your sake, Charlene. Okay, that's a little inside joke we have. Charlene is an associate professor of history at Xavier of Louisiana. She holds a Ph.D. in American history from LSU. Her areas of concentration are in American, African American, and Latin American history. And you can read more of that in her bio. I see that we had to shorten her bio, but I want to call this out because I'm particularly proud about this particular fact about Charlene. She serves as a history department chair at Xavier University of Louisiana currently, right, Charlene?
Yes.
And a lot of times people don't want to be chairs of departments, but she's the chair of the department. And she's also vice president of the Faculty Association and is the 2021 recipient of Xavier University of Louisiana Norman C. Francis Faculty Excellence Award in Teaching. Proud of you, girl.
Thank you.
Okay, Charlene. She's going to talk about narrative shifts in history. Who is telling the story?
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. Okay, so I did like a historian does, and I actually wrote a paper. So you guys will hear me reading the paper, and I hope that it is going to be of interest to you. So I titled the paper, Narrative Shifts in History, Who's Telling the Story? Have you guys ever wondered why there are so many history books about the same historic event? It's because narratives change based on who's telling the story, the questions that a person is asking, and how they're analyzing the historic sources. Historians use the term revisionism. Historic revisionism is the reinterpretation of orthodox views on evidence surrounding a historic event. If you think of history as a revolving door, you'll understand that history is an ongoing dialogue between the past and the present. The interpretations of the past are subject to change based on evidence, on new evidence or overlooked evidence. And what I mean when I mention overlooked evidence, I'm talking about the stories of the voiceless, the stories of the people that history once deemed unimportant. For example, in a feudal system, you'll see that the king's story was always told over the peasant's story. In American slavery, the stories of the master was always told over the stories of the slaves. But that is all changing. And the reason why it's changing is because the field of history is diversifying. Not only are the stories being told diversifying, but the people who are telling the stories are becoming diverse as well. History is no longer being analyzed through a one-dimensional scope. It's being analyzed through the lens of diversity and inclusion. As more minorities move into the field, we are asking history, what about us? Where are our stories? We refuse to continue to be overlooked. And for that fact, we are reevaluating history and writing ourselves into arenas where our stories were never mentioned. There's an African proverb which reads, and I quote, "Until lions have their own histories or historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter." Another one reads, "Until lions start writing their own stories, the hunters will always be the heroes." Both of these quotes, proverbs are extremely similar, but the underlying meaning is the same. The content of a story and the way a story is told depends on the perspectives and the experience of the storyteller. Louisiana has several historic events that are told from the victor standpoint, but these narratives are changing. One of the first stories I would like to mention is the 1811 slave revolt, also known as the German Coast Rebellion of 1811. Most of us know the event very well. The facts are that the rebellion took place on January 8, 1811. It was led by an enslaved man named Charles Deslon. Deslon had a well-organized following of approximately 500 enslaved people. making the slave rebellion one of the largest in United States history. But for almost 200 years, the true story of the importance of this rebellion was lost in history until revisionist historians Albert Thrasher and Leon Waters started to reanalyze documents surrounding the event, publishing in 1996 On to New Orleans, Louisiana's heroic 1811 slave revolt. Since then, several books and articles have been written about the event. The question is, why were the facts and importance of this event suppressed by history? The answer, the story was suppressed by the storytellers telling the story. Two historians, Charles Gayry and Francois Xavier Martin, both considered to be the fathers of Louisiana history, wrote the story of the 1811 rebellion based on their white elitist perspectives, all while overlooking important facts. Charles Gayry, the earliest recognized Louisiana historian, was the grandson of the first mayor of New Orleans during American rule. Not only was he a historian, he was an attorney, a slave owner, a politician, and later a Confederate sympathizer. His account of the 1811 revolt provided very few details. However, he did mention the orderly manner to which the slaves advanced to New Orleans, stating that the slaves were organized into companies under the command of officers and marching in a military fashion to the beat of drums. To me, Gary actually seemed a bit impressed. Nevertheless, he declared that the rebellion was a foolish attempt of slaves to gain position. He went on to discuss how the military actually defeated the rebels rather easily. He said that the rebels were cowards and that they were retreating into the swamp. And we all know that to be untrue. But Gary's interpretation of the events accomplished its purpose, and that purpose was to legitimize the institution of slavery and to paint the rebellion as insignificant. In 1827, Francois Xavier Martin, another elitist who was, or just so happened to be, the first Attorney General of the state of Louisiana and a Louisiana Supreme Court justice, he wrote only one paragraph about the 1811 rebellion in his vast history of Louisiana, starting from French rule all the way to the Battle of New Orleans. One paragraph. In that one paragraph, he discussed how the rebel slaves were captured and executed, providing the detail that the heads of the rebel slaves were staked along the river. In 1939, historian and Tulane professor John S. Kendall, and here's a side note, Kendall was a professor at Tulane for about 15 years, and he wrote a 700-page history of the city of New Orleans, like the first 100 years, all the way until 1922. So anyways, Kendall in 1939 writes this article titled Shadow Over the City. It was an article that, it was in that article that the first connection between the 1811 rebellion and the 1791 Haitian Revolution was made, although briefly, and only to imply that the rebellion was hard fought, and I quote, "Only the narrowest of margins had the state escaped a repetition of the brutal and sanguinary scenes which had marked the Servile Revolt in Haiti," end quote. The article went on to spew the interpretations of the 1811 rebellion based on the racial biases of the 1930s. Kendall called the enslaved army barbarians and savages, while justifying the need for white supremacy to reign and bring back order to the city. These three storytellers / historians analyzed the historic events surrounding the 1811 rebellion and interpreted it to be unimportant and insignificant. That's why one of the largest slave rebellions in the history of the United States was lost for almost 200 years. Yet, despite their interpretations, these storytellers / historians left small clues for historic revisionists to go back and uncover. Gary told us that the enslaved army marched in a military style. Martin told us what happened after the enslaved were captured and executed. And then Kendall gave us the Haitian connection. These three small pieces inspired historians to go back and research the events, and we are very, very glad that they did. What we as historians are tasked with is analyzing primary sources and interpreting them as they are. That's how we get to the true story of events, despite the narratives that are told to us. So now I'm going to switch gears and look at a few of the riots that happened between 1866 and 1873. Most of the riots were actually massacres designed to suppress voting rights, land ownership, economic advancement, education, freedom of press, and/or of labor rights of African Americans. And while they were often referred to as riots by storytellers of the past, revisionists are re-examining these events and interpreting them as massacres with the intent to maintain control and white supremacy. The first case is the New Orleans riot of 1866 at Mechanics Institute. Now, there's so much history here, so I'm gonna go ahead and set the stage of kind of what's going on. We have the United States Civil War, which lasts from 1861 to 1865, right? In 1862, just 1 year after the war began, New Orleans was captured by Union forces. From 1862 through the end of the war, Louisiana served as a test ground for Lincoln's 10% plan, which he unrolled in 1863. The plan specified that a Southern state could be readmitted back into the Union if 10% of the population swore an oath of allegiance to the Union. All Southerners, except for high-ranking Confederate Army officials and government officials, would be granted full pardons. Days after the war ended, we all know what happened. Lincoln was assassinated, and our new president, Andrew Johnson, he became vice president. So Johnson continued to implement Lincoln's 10% plan. Under this plan, former Confederates simply received a slap on the wrist for their involvement in the Civil War. By 1864, Louisiana convened a constitutional convention, which had some of the same government official leaders as it did prior to the Civil War. Now, these white Southern Democrats, they knew that slavery was over. They understood that there's nothing they could have done about that, but they wanted to maintain control of the newly freed slaves. So in 1865, they wrote in the Black Codes. Radical Republicans, both Blacks and whites, were enraged by the passage of the Black Codes. And Congress then passed the 14th Amendment, which was passed in 1866. So with that, that amendment granted everyone citizenship rights. What happened now is that the radical Republicans, both Blacks and whites, they started to question the Louisiana Constitution of 1864. And so they asked that a new constitutional convention be called, and it was called at Mechanics Hall in 1866 to discuss drafting a new constitution based on the new amendment that had just passed. So historian and Tulane professor, and I'm going back to John Kennedy because this man is just quite interesting. He wrote that the city's true government was being tampered with by radical Republicans, resulting in the city being, and I quote, overrun with undesirable characters. Kendall faulted the radicals from the North for stirring up the Negro population against the whites. And I actually laughed out loud when I read Kendall's description of how the Negro population had gotten out of hand in his chapter 14 of his History of New Orleans. It read like a script of D.W.F. Griffin's Birth of the Nation, the 1915 film. And dare I say, it was all written with the cliche attack of a white woman by a Black man. Kendall, citing the time-picayunes from August 1st, 1866, blamed a man named Dotsey. Now, I don't know if that's his first name or his last name, but anyways, he says Dotsey was the principal speaker rallying the Black men to riot. Kendall claimed that Dotsey encouraged Black men to kill any white man who molested them. So you see, Kendall is creating a narrative that places white supremacists as defenders instead of offenders. And these are some of Kendall's words, and I had to write it in there because, I mean, I could tell you about it, but you just got to hear it. Okay, so here it goes. This is Kendall's words from his history. It is difficult to state what followed in the exact chronological order. As near as can be inferred from the testimony of an eyewitness, a throng of curious whites collected at the corner of Dryad Street and Canal, watching the Negroes grouped in front of the Institute. Suddenly, a shot was fired, probably by a Negro. The police immediately attempted to arrest the offender, and it said succeeded. But while so engaged, other shots had been fired a block away, at the corner of Common and Dyer Street, where some other white people had also congregated. The Negroes became panic-stricken. Some fled through the grounds of adjacent residences, but the majority of them sought refuge in the entrance of the Institute and opened a frantic, indiscriminate fusillade upon the mob and the police. End quote. So Kendall went on to discuss how the rioters were arrested, but on the way to the police station, some terrible scenes ensued. Yet, Kendall insists that the police, and I quote, did their full duty in trying to protect them from the crowd. And you notice how Kendall describes the whites as a mob at first, and then later a crowd. He's trying to downplay what really happened. And that was that basically there was no protection and the police was actually a part of the mob. According to Kendall's narrative, 42 policemen and several citizens had either been killed or wounded. He later stated the numbers to be 38 killed and 146 wounded on both sides. Radical Republicans in Congress did an investigation, placing the blame on the mob/crowd and also on President Johnson. But Kendall didn't accept that. He wrote that a minority report showed that the riot was the fault of the conventionalists. And after this event, Congress, of course, ushered in Radical Reconstruction. And Radical Reconstruction lasted from 1867 all the way to 1877. Louisiana and Texas was grouped together in the 5th Military District, and the rest is history. But the account of what happened at Mechanics Hall was told by several white newspapers in the city and the only one Black newspaper at the time, La Tribune. But Kendall did not cite or quote anything from La Tribune about the event. Kendall's version of what happened was the narrative that was taught for many years until revisionists like Carolyn Cross Bell re-examined the evidence and took into account the voices of Blacks. From her account, we know that a gang of white supremacists and ex-Confederates, some police officers and firemen, attacked a peaceful crowd of Black marchers who gathered outside of Mechanics Hall. According to Bell, the attack was premeditated and led by Police Chief Harry T. Hayes, who had the habit of recruiting ex-Confederate soldiers as policemen. The attack led to a total of 150 wounded, including 48 deaths. Out of the 48 deaths, 44 were African Americans and 3 were white radical Republicans. Now, this is completely different from Kendall's account. With this new interpretation, we can clearly understand why this event is called a massacre and not a riot. A riot implies that 2 groups of people are fighting against each other, but this was a planned attack by one group upon another. Once Radical Reconstruction started, you would think that these incidents of riots and massacres would have ended, but it didn't. Whites in Louisiana were more determined to maintain power of their former slaves by any means necessary. Historians today are calling the Opelousas riot of 1868 the deadliest incident of racial violence during Reconstruction era. And yet, not many people know about its occurrence because it was buried in history by historians of the time as an insignificant event. Historians and white-based newspapers claimed that approximately 30 people died in that event. But upon further investigation by revisionist historians, that number seems to be closer to about 150 or more, and the majority of them from the African-American community. So what happened? Blacks wanted to vote. They were actually trying to join a Democratic political group in the neighboring town of Washington. Now, despite this, whites and Opelousas were not having it, resulting in the Knights of the White Camellia responding to the perceived political threat with violence. In response, Emerson Bentley, who was an 18-year-old Yankee, Ohio-born school teacher, he was also the editor of The Progress, which was a Republican newspaper in Opelousas. He wrote what many whites thought was an inflammatory article suggesting that Blacks should remain loyal to the Republican Party. After that article appeared, Bentley was severely beaten by the KKK, and he eventually fled town. But several Blacks thought that he was killed, which led to the riot. Both Blacks and whites were armed, but the whites were, of course, more armed, heavily armed than the Blacks. No one knows who fired the first shot, but I must say, like I said, it was an unfair fight. In the end, approximately 150 people were killed, majority Black, and yet the story was hidden from history or hidden in history for decades because the storytellers at the time deemed the event insignificant. The last story that I'll discuss is the Colfax riot, which actually was, and you probably guessed it, a massacre more than a riot. This riot happened in 1873 in Colfax, which is in Rapides Parish. And for you Louisiana people, you know that to be near Alexandria. The fighting began over the winner of the 1872 governor's race in Louisiana. President Grant sent federal troops to support the Republican candidate, while white Southerners formed the White League, a paramilitary group that was similar to the KKK. In response, an all-Black militia took control of the courthouse in April of 1873. Soon after, a mob of about 150 KKK members and white leagues surrounded the courthouse. Eventually, the Black militia surrendered, but when they surrendered, they were murdered by the mob. The exact number of African-American men massacred is unknown, but historians estimate the number to be around or between 60 to 150 Black men. Historian Eric Fauner, he wrote in his book, Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution from 1863 to 1877, that this was the bloodiest single incident of racial carnage in the Reconstruction era. And he wrote this book in 1998. So the Colfax massacre was lost in history until 1920, when local officials raised a monument in the Colfax Cemetery honoring the 3 white men who died in the attack on the courthouse. And they called it a riot. The monument read, and I quote, "Erected to the memory of the heroes," and it listed the 3 names who fell in the Colfax riot while fighting for white supremacy, end quote. In 1851, the city of Colfax went on ahead and marked the site of the massacre with a plaque. And once again, it called the massacre a riot. And it says the riot marked the end of carpetbagging misrule in the South. The plaque was only taken down in May of 2021. So that's quite recent. So those were but a few of the stories of Louisiana's sordid racial past that have come to light in the era of historic revisionism that challenges the narratives of historic events. With all of these new storytellers, historians analyzing history, we are now excited and happy that our voices will no longer be lost in history, but that our voices will be heard. And before I end, I think I might have a little more time left. I wanted to go ahead and share my screen to show you guys some of the some of the documents. So this document right here, let me go back. this document right here was the official statements given by some of the generals that were in the city of New Orleans while the riot happened. And this is a primary source document found at the Library of Congress. It says the New Orleans riot, it was no riot, it was an absolute massacre by the police, a murder perpetrated by the mayor. So you can go and find that and read the exact account. And then here we have a couple newspapers that talked about the different riots in Opelousas. To the left of your screen is the Progress. That is the paper where Emerson Bentley had actually wrote his story about, trying to convince Black people to stay on the Republican side. And then on the other side, we have the New Orleans Republic, which was a huge Republican newspaper in New Orleans at the time. And in the far corner, there's a small little story about what happened in Opelousas. And again, historians of the time just went on ahead and passed over it. This is the placard or whatever that was erected, and it was erected in 1951 at Colfax. It says, on this site occurred the Colfax riot in which 3 white men and 150 Negroes were slain. The event on April 13, 1873 marked the end of the carpetbag misrule in the South. And again, this was just recently taken down in May of 2021. So that's all I have for you guys. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Senegal DeQueer. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that you mentioned some things that some of our members are familiar with. We marked the spot for La Tribune, the paper. One of our members, his great-grandfather, I think his great-grandfather, was Charles Roudinet, the first publisher of the paper. And then we've had Leon Waters as well to participate in our conferences to talk about some different aspects of the slave revolt. And I love the fact that we have this revisionist history opportunity, because even in my profession, educational psychologist, AERA, the big research association, apologized in a recent letter to its membership because they said we've got it wrong. And all of the educational research we've done, it has been at the disadvantage of students that needed us the most. And they apologized to that. I'm sure it comes out of all the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff. But so much is they're apologetic about it now, because of the opportunities that Black Lives Matter gave them. But it's just telling the story and telling it right. Sorry, I had to give my own editorial on that. Thank you very much. And next we have a lawyer, Mitch Crusto, who's going to talk about convergence storytelling, legal perspectives. And Mitch is a Henry F. Bonora Distinguished Professor of Law at Loyola College of Law, where he's been teaching for over 25 years. I think he lives somewhere else and does he comes back and forth. And for COVID was doing a lot of online teaching. His scholarly works focus on the intersectionality of constitutional law, race, gender, and class. Intersectionality is the big thing now. His research and scholarship analyzed the contentious issue of Black ownership and enslavement of Black people, particularly in colonial and antebellum Louisiana. I'm sure you can read a little bit more about his books, his seminal book, as well as the law review articles that he has published in. Just a little personal note, he holds law degrees from Yale Law School in Oxford. He was a Marshall Scholar from Oxford. In addition to teaching at Loyola, he has taught as a visiting professor at the University of Miami, at Wash U in St. Louis, and at Vermont Law Schools. He's a native of New Orleans. He lists that he's a member of St. Peter Claver Church and a graduate of St. Augustine High School. And I think some of his classmates were in on the session earlier. I'm going to hand it over to Mitch Crusto.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and panelists. So first of all, let me thank Dr. Rhodes for her longstanding commitment to our culture, and also to our program director, Dr. Sheck Snyder, for all of her fine work in putting together this marvelous program. I want to comment for a moment on the speakers, some of their earlier speakers, and of course on Dr. Senegal DeQueer's comment just recently as well. This morning, if you weren't here, you missed some fantastic speakers. Dr. Williams from the Smithsonian Institute, and by the way, thank you to Smithsonian Institute and to Xavier University, of course, for their contribution to the program and to the center. Dr. Williams spoke about her grandfather's oral history, I guess if you want to call it that, and the work that she does in the digitization of our history, and thank you for that. Dr. Dolio Johnson, who's probably a relative of mine, and I'm probably related to half of the panel and probably half of the participants, because I'm related to the Dolios by way of my Crusto family, and probably related to the Rhodes by way of my Jupiter family, but we'll save all of that. And whenever I'm in the Scheck-Snyder neighborhood, everyone thinks I'm a Scheck-Snyder, so I'm probably related to the Scheck-Snyders, et cetera. Dr. Dolio Johnson on the 7th Ward. Of course, I'm from the 5th Ward, so I'm a little bit, kind of like, okay, the Corpus Christi folks, that's fine, and the Epiphany folks, but the St. Peter Claver folks and St. Augustine Church folks and Treme, shout out to them as well. But I learned a lot about the 7th Ward and about our history and culture. And unfortunately, what is being erased, continuously erased. It's phenomenal how even after Katrina, we erased Basin Street. I mean, there's not even between Basin Street, Rampart Street, and Claiborne. I think we have no nightclubs or bars, except maybe one on Claiborne that maintained our jazz history. I mean, nowhere in the world would anyone erase the kind of incredible culture that we have established in this city and in this state, but for the state of Louisiana. But that's another point of conversation. Kind of get me started on that. Dr. Pierre, thank you very much for your contribution in teaching us about podcasting, phenomenal work. And Dr. Senegal DeQueer, kind of an introduction to my presentation in a sense, because who controls the narrative? I'm going to talk about a controversial issue, which is the mythology that white males have given to us, which is that all women of color in antebellum Louisiana were unaccomplished victims of enslavement. We're all kind of victims of enslavement, and certainly enslavement led us to be victimized. But despite those victimizations, we were not unaccomplished. So I'm going to talk about the accomplishments of Black women in the antebellum Louisiana period as one of my points of my presentation. One of our beautiful Black sisters of Creole background, Beyonce, as you might know, even though she reigns from Texas, actually has her roots in Creole, Louisiana. I'm going to talk about her in a second. Just keep that slide up for a second. Before I kind of get into the detail, I want to do a shout out to my beautiful Creole daughters, Eve and Teresa and Mia. Also to Judge Ivan Lamel, who our first Black judge, federal judge, who's still serving on the bench, Chancellor Ray Diamond at LSU Law School, who nominated me for this program, and my lovely wife, Lisa Jupiter Crusto. I also want to mention that I'm going to talk about Creole women of color. And you might go, well, why is this guy talking about women? Well, I'm talking about women because I'm a product of Creole women of color. Between my mother, Wilma Sawney Crusto Wilson, my aunt, Diane Sawney Gaines, Prevost Sawney Gaines, have all contributed to my upbringing. I am a creature and a product of Black women. Some of my research in one of my major articles talks about the struggle that Black women had, particularly relative to property rights in antebellum Louisiana. And I'll talk a little bit about that in my comments today. I'm also proud to say, as Dr. Rhodes has mentioned, I'm a product of St. Peter Claver's Church and also St. Augustine's High School. And I'm very excited about the preparation that they gave to me in helping me move forward to Yale University, Yale Law School, and Oxford University. Also, shout out to Warren Bell, because he also was at Yale and gave me a lot of guidance along with Michael Bagneris and some of the other St. Augustine graduates. So enough of the introductions. Let's talk about the message for today. So why start with Beyonce? Well, you might know that she was on the cover of Vogue magazine, an incredible accomplishment. In the course of in that magazine, there was an article entitled "Her Life, Her Body, and Her Heritage," and I want to kind of comment on the nature of what she said about her heritage and why history matters to us today. History matters for lots of reasons. She basically said in relationship to her heritage, and I'm going to read the comment verbatim. I come from a lineage of broken male-female relationships, abuse of power, and mistrust. Only when I saw that clearly was I able to resolve those conflicts in my own relationship. Connecting to the past and knowing our history makes us both bruised and beautiful. I researched my ancestry recently and learned that I come from a slave owner who fell in love and married a slave. I had to process that revelation over time. I questioned what it meant and tried to put it into perspective. I'll now believe it's why God blessed me with my twins, male and female energy, was able to coexist and grow in my blood for the first time. I pray that I'm able to break the generational curses in my family and that my family will have less and that my children will have less complicated lives. So look, I don't know about you, but the impact of enslavement, the complications of growing up in a segregated society. I mean, I remember when St. Augustine's, the only Black Catholic male high school, had to sue the archdiocese in order to compete with the quote unquote Catholic schools, as if we weren't a Catholic school. And then when we won the lawsuit and we were first allowed to compete with the other quote unquote Catholic all-white schools, they held 24 of our football players ineligible, basically doing things that handicapped our equal performance. And we can go on on that. But Beyonce's, I guess, reflections, I think are reflections that we all should have about how history continues to impact our present lives, and not just psychologically and emotionally, but financially and otherwise. You know, we've had tons of wealth over the centuries that have been taken away from us. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in terms of my presentation. But let me go into the specifics of what I want to talk about. I'm talking about Creole women of color, challenges and outstanding achievements, and the use of legal documents as evidence of the historical record. So let me first of all mention antebellum Louisiana, 1830 to 1860. Enslaved women were the property of their white male owners. This meant that white men owned, controlled all aspects of these women, including the right to own property, the right to procreate, to contract, and to associate. Okay, so imagine you wake up one morning and you've been kidnapped, and you're now the enslaved person in a sex trafficking ring, in a worldwide sex trafficking ring. And can you imagine the impact that would have on you psychologically and emotionally? Well, that was the environment that our women lived in through the time, not only of slavery, but throughout the period that Dr. Senegal Queer mentioned, even after Reconstruction and during Reconstruction. It wasn't a joyful time. And then after, with the restoration of quote unquote white rule, we had, of course, lynchings and other kind of instances of abuse as well. Let's talk about the color line. So throughout the South, the law sought to establish and enforce a color line to prevent interracial relationships and collaboration. Despite the color line, white men and Black women procreated, producing, hello, what do I look like? Biracial offspring, right? Okay. To protect white wealth from the desire of white men to adopt Black wives and biracial children, the law prohibited marriage between Blacks and whites and prohibited the inheritance rights of Blacks. This legally labeled Black women as mistresses and their biracial children as legal bastards. That's a legal term, by the way, okay? You were not going to be the result of a marriage because you couldn't be legally married. And there were tons of impacts that had in terms of inheritance rights in Louisiana and throughout the South and throughout the country. Louisiana, despite all of that, was a little bit unique. We like to celebrate our uniqueness, but let's remember that the majority of Black people were enslaved. The majority of Black women were abused, okay? But we had some different nuances historically in Louisiana that gives us a little bit of a difference. So for most Black women in antebellum Louisiana, white men totally controlled their sexuality. However, due to its Mediterranean, Caribbean, interracial mixing, Spanish law, and I know we give the French a lot of credit, but it was really Spanish law that we really kind of resulted from, because Spain owned Louisiana for the longest period of time, up until transferring it to Napoleon, who then flipped it over to selling it to Louisiana, to the state of, to the US government, and the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church has mixed kind of marks on this, okay? So we're happy that we're Catholic, and we're happy that we have Xavier University, but the Catholic Church wasn't exactly always a leader as it relates to race relations. Louisiana had a unique Creole history relating to women of color, particularly antebellum New Orleans, had a significant number of free women who were free, not enslaved. Some of them were born free, while most of them negotiated their journey from enslavement to freedom. A notable few of them reached high heights of conventional achievement, including owning plantations and enslaved people. My first thesis at Yale was whether or not Black folks owned slaves. And when I proposed to the history department that I would do this study under John Blassingame, Professor Blassingame at Yale History Department, they said, well, Crusto, you're really a smart guy, but Black folks never owned slaves. I go, well, darn it, my grandmother was telling some lies, because she was telling me about how they lost the plantation. And so they said, okay, Crusto, we'll give you a shot. And then I did my thesis showing, of course, that Black folks did own slaves, including, as you might know, built Melrose Plantation in Natchitoches, Louisiana. The Matoyer family owned about 350 slaves going into the Civil War, and they weren't the only ones, but primarily in Louisiana, excuse me, and in some other states. Antebellum Louisiana life reflected colonial Louisiana law. As a result, antebellum Louisiana was different from the rest of the South in three different ways. Number one, some people of color were permitted to be free. Number two, some whites and Blacks were permitted to create families. And number three, women, including those of color, were permitted to own real and personal property. Relative to interracial relationships, it's important to understand a very controversial concept called the plaçage, which was a commonplace custom in French and Spanish colonies. Plaçage was a contractual arrangement whereby white men and free women of color, whether of African, Native American, or mixed race descent, lived together as a family. The children of these unions took the legal status of their mother, that is, they were free children of color. The plaçage contract could not be placed aside should the white male go on to marry a white woman. He was held to the commitment of the contract. In some cases, interracial marriages were blessed by the Catholic Church. Now, there's a lot of mystique and a lot of misinformation about plaçage. So let me kind of give you one aspect of a plaçage, which I'll talk about in relationship to the McCarthy, the Mandeville family. We have this picture of white men going to a ball and picking out Black women as if they were prostitutes. That was not the case. And in fact, relative to, and it has been documented, I have the documentation, relative to Eulalia de Mandeville, which I'll talk about in a second, for a little bit about her. Eulalia de Mandeville was a very wealthy, very accomplished businesswoman in New Orleans, in antebellum New Orleans. She basically was in a plaçage relationship where she picked out a white man, Eugene McCarthy, to have a relationship with, okay? As a result, they had a number of children, okay? Now, what happens in this story, and I'll kind of get to the story because I'm gonna be running out of time before very long, is that when he died, when McCarthy died, his white relatives sued Eulalia de Mandeville, and there's an extensive record at the University of New Orleans on this case, claiming that all of what she owned belonged to him, thereby belonging to the white family. But fortunately, Eulalia de Mandeville was not someone to be messed with. Eulalia de Mandeville was actually the child and relative of the very famous and very powerful Mandeville family, Marigny family that owned a section of Louisiana, which we know, New Orleans, outside the French Quarter, which is the Marigny neighborhood. Okay, they owned all that. She was a relative, direct descendant of the Marigny family. The court basically got all sort of evidence and all sort of testimony showing that she was the successful one. She was the one who built the business. She's the one who owned all the property, and that her white relationship with her white paramour really produced very little wealth in his name. As a result, she won the case. All right, I'm running out of time. Let me give you my summary of the Black women who I want to point out to you were extremely accomplished in light of the incredible odds, in light of enslavement in the disposition that society treated both women independently and women of color in addition to that, and by way of slavery in addition to that. I'm going to point out to you three women who had incredible accomplishments. The first one you all know, Henriette DeLille, founder of the Sisters of the Holy Family. The daughter of one of the oldest families of color in New Orleans, Henriette DeLille made a name for herself as the founder of the Sisters of the Holy Family, the second oldest Catholic religious order for women of color. And you know a little bit more about her, so I'm not going to spend as much time going through the detail. Another was in the area of education. That's Maria Covan, African-born widow of the wealthy Black businessman Bernard Covan. Left money in her will when she died in 1837 to establish the Institut Catholique, one of the first schools in the United States to provide free education for the children of African descent. That school was opened in 1848 in New Orleans, okay, for the education of people of African descent, Black people. Even though the history books will tell us, that we weren't educated and did not have educational institutions. The last one is, as I mentioned to you, Eulalia de Mandeville, entrepreneur of extraordinary energy and business acumen, who became one of New Orleans' wealthiest women of color, the daughter of Count Pierre Philippe Mandeville de Marigny, and a family slave named Marie Jean. She was half sister Bernard de Marigny. Going on and on in time, again, they had 7 children, her and McCarthy. And I did tell you about the lawsuit in which she won in documentation that shows all of the extensive business dealings that she had in property ownership in the Treme and in the French Quarter. In fact, if you didn't know it, I would say probably a good 40% of the French Quarter was owned by free people of color before it was kind of effectively taken away from us. Civil rights, Josephine de Cuir, a designated Creole, and her husband lived in Louisiana and in France. Long story short, after the Civil War, Mrs. de Cuir sued the steamboat company because they would not let her sit in the first class section of the steamboat. She won that lawsuit in the state of Louisiana. She was a civil rights leader, but not a civil rights icon. That case went before the US Supreme Court. It was a forerunner of Plessy versus Ferguson. We all know about Plessy versus Ferguson, which established separate but equal, but it was Madame de Cuir's lawsuit that really laid the foundation in which the Supreme Court said that it's the federal government and not the state government that controls interstate commerce. But she won that case and won money in the state of Louisiana. She technically lost in the Supreme Court at the Supreme Court level, not because she lost personally, but because the court wanted to lay the foundation of their control over these issues. But she is a civil rights icon. All of these women, these 4 women and tons of others we should have plaques and celebrations of their life and their contributions. let me conclude with this. The image of women of color has been and remained the property of white male historians, fixated on quadroon balls and Storyville. We need an aggressive anti-racism agenda to discover the facts, face those facts, and manage the current effects of those facts relative to the status of women of color. While we were descendants of enslavement, it is our choice on how to embrace freedom. That's my comments for today. Thank you very much. Look forward to your questions and comments.
Unmute, Elizabeth. Unmute. Oh,
Thanks,
there you go.
Chantel. Thank you for the reminder. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you for dispelling the myth. You had an audience of accomplished women and you paid tribute to the important women in your life. So thanks for doing that. I have a question for you that came to me because the person couldn't come through the chat. But I want to give you some time in answering this because and feel free to not answer it if you don't think. But the question that came from someone who texted me on my phone and couldn't get in was, are Creole women of color being exploited today? Let it sit with you for a minute and
it doesn't have to sit.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, you know,
in what ways?
Capitalism has and continues to exploit culture. Okay. Whether it's kind of more obvious perhaps in Native American culture, and there have been lawsuits that in fact Native American tribes have won. But you go to Target and you see, for example, Native American prints, you see African style prints. I don't know why white people have a problem with their own culture, but they like to steal and borrow our culture without paying for the freight of doing so. I mean, it's fine to use our culture, okay? Use the term Creole, Creole cuisine, right? Cajun, whatever background, we want to talk about. I don't have a problem with you using it, but pay us a royalty for using it.
It's a commodity that they grab and steal.
Absolutely, and why I started with Beyonce. I mean, basically.
Right. I think that's what generated that question.
Absolutely, thank you.
I noticed that there are questions that have already been answered. Dr. Williams has answered some of the questions in the chat, so you all could look at that. Monica Pierre has answered some of the questions in the chat and has addressed some things. Some people have put additional resources in the chat as links to further the discussion. I've got a quick question from, I'm sorry. I'd like to point Dr. Senegal to Queer, if you could go to the chat and look at Mark Rudenay's question. Mark Rudenay and Monica, I saw that you answered some. One for me for the staff of the Smith Center, the Smithsonian staff. What's a media wrangler? If you can give me a real quick answer to that. And what are they going to do in this project?
So our media wrangler is AJ Lawrence. I'm not quite sure he's on at this moment, but AJ, what he does is he does a lot of work on the digitization, but he takes that metadata and all that information to make sure that it is included in the digital assets that we digitize, those assets. So that's the role that that's his main role. He also does a lot of great work on our new project where we are gifting equipment as well. So he's working on managing that too. So I'm not quite sure if AJ jumped on yet, but that's the wrangler. That's where the wrangler comes from.
So he wrangles all the metadata from media that you are collecting. And wonderful. Well, we need a media wrangler. So that's one question. And maybe if others of the presenters have had a chance to look, Dr. Williams, Eva Baham addressed something to you too that you might want to address, or somebody on your staff may want to address. But anybody else have any questions, or anybody else on the support channel? Eva Bayham addresses something to you, Dr. Crusto, so you may want to look at that. Can you go to the question and answers and see those questions? If so, why don't you answer it for the general audience? You all can take your time about who's going to go first. And if not, I will sing again, and I don't want you, I know you don't want me to do that.
Sure, thank you.
Oh, go ahead, right ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So Ava asked first, I appreciate your correcting Beyonce's comment that she is the descendant of a married slaveholder and enslaved woman. First of all, let me comment on that first point. Beyonce might be right, even though up until the Supreme Court's decision in the 1950s, interracial marriage was illegal in the majority of states in this country. And it's interesting that we being the Supreme Court, has now found the right to marriage to be a fundamental right, now that same-sex couples wanted to be married, but it wasn't considered fundamental when we were trying to marry interracially. And in the queer, in the Maroney Mandeville relationship, they actually were married right before he died in the church, in the Catholic Church. Again, these were very wealthy people, very well influential people. And so it's possible that Beyonce's ancestors were in fact legally married. There were also other instances where, interracial couples left the state and married. Lots of stories I can tell you where that happened. People went to France and got married. People went to St. Louis and got married. So it's possible that they were married. So that's point number one, even though it was not the norm. Question number two from Ava is, how have the volumes of work on enslaved and free women of color informed your work? For example, Emily Clark work disputing the idea of placage. Most recently, Dr. Jessica Johnson's phenomenal work on African descended women in the 18th century. I think that those are very important works, and there's a lot more coming. And of course, the panelists all have phenomenal information and backgrounds that add to it. Placage is still one of those kind of mystique kind of items of interest. From a lawyer standpoint, effectively, it was a contract of marriage, okay? And, we kind of, white society wants to make it dirty, because it was interracial, right? And assume that it was the white male that had status over the Black woman. Clearly, in the Mandeville versus McCarthy case, it was a Black woman who had status. She picked, and her family picked McCarthy. Okay, McCarthy was the lesser of the two, financially, status-wise, and all the rest. And so, even though the reality is it was a contract of a relationship, that's not so unusual. We have premarital contracts in the law, and these contracts were of a similar nature, especially when the law would not recognize your relationship. So I hope that helps. I don't mean to hog the conversation. Thank you for the questions.
Okay, who's going to go next? Okay,
I'd like to go next. So the question is, and I'm going to go ahead and read the question. It says, my question relates to the power of our stories to affect social change. For example, when 1619 is told as an original story, this hidden history creates new awareness, changes curriculum, and inspires new activism. But for most of us telling the stories of resistance to oppression, find ourselves preaching to the choir. What do you see as essential to becoming better hidden history storytellers in order to reach a wider audience and inspire change? Well, that's the million-dollar question right there, because currently America is going through this whole struggle with critical race theory, right? And everything, whenever you talk about oppressors and new activism, I think America actually shies away from the truth. They really are, they don't want to know. We know it, but they don't really want to know it. They don't want to really rip the Band-Aid off and have to deal with all of the issues that are underlining, which causes us to continue to be at the same position that we are in currently in America, right? So history constantly is repeating itself because we're not looking at these things. We are not telling our stories. And it is best to just go ahead and try to tell the story to as many people who are going to be listening. It doesn't matter if you think that you're not getting someone to listen, because there's always someone listening. Right? In my classes, I tell the truth. I set out the facts. I allow my students to come up with their own interpretations of the facts. And so if the facts are always going to be present, then the story is always going to be true. So all that we can do is continue to tell the facts and allow America to see the truth in the facts. And we just have to keep doing it. And if we don't have, if America, our history, don't give us a platform to do it, we have to create our own platforms to continue to do it. The platforms that we have at HBCUs, the platform that we have here, we have to continue to create our own platforms and tell our stories so that we can become a part of America, right? It's not just American history, it's or African-American history, it's American history. It's something that should be taught 365 days a year, not 1 month, not 1 week, not 1 day. It's something that when students come into colleges, they should already know. It's no reason to separate it outside of what's going on with American. It's all part of American history. And so we just have to continue to tell our stories to anyone who's going to listen. And that's my say on it.
Okay. Any other questions? Dr. Williams?
There was one question. I didn't get to go into the photo with Alain Locke, and so I will answer that. I was making sure I didn't go over time. So the young woman who brought this in said this is a picture of, I do believe, her great-grandfather. This is the information that she got from her father at the time, that this is a picture, a photograph taken between 1914 and 1917, that they had narrowed it down to 1915 and 1917 in Boston. And this is a UNIA Garvey group that her great-grandfather was in, along with Alain Locke. That's the information that she had given us. They got the timeline down by tracing the death of the photographer and the closing of the company. And this is one photo that they had. And there were others as well, but this was the main one that she brought in. So she brought it in, we looked at it, and we got excited and went crazy over it. But she had so many other different pieces that she didn't bring in that day, but we continue discussions with her over the next several months. I also want to make sure that some of my teams jumped on, Hannah Scruggs and Lisa Crawley. They manage our Family History Center. I didn't get a chance to talk about them. And they do a wonderful job working with visitors, both on-site and virtually, to help individuals go through their family research and genealogy. And if they can go, someone on my team can go ahead and put the Family History Center email in the chat so people can click on there and send in a request if you want to do a session with them, as well as we have some of our media conservation team on online as well and available in chat. So we definitely want to make sure we stay in touch and get in touch so that when we're there in the next year, we can continue to work with the New Orleans communities.
Dr. Williams, I might mention that the question came from Dr. Baham, who teaches at Dillard University.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, and so for her to raise the question, I'm sure she has more to say about it. And next year, when you all come down, she may have some clues as to, and maybe your special staff person in photography can help us figure out how we can establish those connections between people who take a photograph together. Because, there might have been some club that we don't know about or some occasion where they met. Fatima Shaker wrote that wonderful book, has the primary source materials of those meetings and had to create a fictional story, but she has the minutes of that organization. And that's what she has, but there are not lots of photographs as Lynette pointed out, we've lost a lot. And so anyway, I think she probably has more to say about that, and I hope she's still on. So, but she can't necessarily talk, so I'm talking for her.
That's fine, we can exchange emails.
Okay, good. Anybody else want to go ahead now? Who is the staff person for photography, Dr. Williams? Did you put a staff?
Yes, her name is Leah Jones,
Oh.
and she just put her information in the chat.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, good, good, good. Lynette, I know there are members, there's all kinds of comments about how wonderful your presentation was. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the impetus for your presentation and your passion behind your projects? Because you've done wonderful projects for La Creole.
Well, I mean, it's kind of obvious. I'm from the 7th Ward, if you didn't guess that. And I'm really interested in what places like that, what the future entails for them, places that were clearly historic and important, places that African Americans built up out of a lot of determination and grit and against the odds, and were very, very successful. And places that for various reasons have fallen into disrepair and disinvestment. What do you do with places like that? How do you revitalize them? And if so, who is to do that work, and who is to be the new residents of places like that? Because a lot of the families who built that place are no longer there. And so if we're preserving it and preserving its memory, how do we do that, and who are we doing it for? Why is it important? So I'm really interested in exploring that, and also interested in Black spaces like that remaining at least an option for us, because we, to some extent, have been getting edged out of the downtown area again. And that's a real concern, because we tend to get edged out of places that grow as they grow in value. And so we have a difficult time accumulating Black wealth because of that. Real estate is the #1 avenue for accumulating wealth. And if we're edged out of that game, then we continue to be on the margins. And so we see that happening in New Orleans again, where, as Dr. Crusoe pointed out, we at one point were near half in terms of ownership of the French Quarter at one time. We are completely displaced. The French Quarter, the residency there is now something like 87%, I think 92% white. Faubourg Marigny is the same case. We were there. We left the French Quarter, we went to the Marigny, we got edged out of there. We went to Tremé. You can see what's happening there today. And now we see that wave of development coming from the city's core downtown to the 7th Ward. And I'm really concerned that we will be displaced from the 7th Ward as well. So I'm interested in preserving the history of these places, but also trying to figure out what happens to these places going forward as they gain attraction and value.
Yeah, we see, a lot of us see evidence of the 7th Ward being gentrified, and it's, but anyway, yeah. I see one panelist, one attendee said, whose last name is DeQueer, would like info on Cane River area and surname Conant. Anybody have any? There probably is a member of our organization who can talk.
That's Conant.
Oh, I'm sorry, Conant. So
that's my mother-in-law.
Okay, so you, all right, your mother-in-law is asking you a question. Tell us a little bit about it, please.
Mother-in-law's from Cane River.
And are you from Cane River too, Charlene?
I am not. I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana originally, and I have quite a interesting family history. My grandfather told me years and years ago, I've always been a historian. As a little girl, I always collected stories from the grandpa and everyone else who would tell me. I was just one of those kids that was always intrigued. And so he told me years and years and years ago about the story of how our family came down to Louisiana, and my last name is Senegal. My maiden name is Senegal, so West Africa. And so he said that his great grandfather orally ended up coming in actually after the Civil War. And to me, that just did not, I'm like, huh? But that's what he said. And he said he ended up coming into Louisiana. He made his way down to the Keynote area, married a white lady named Mary Brasso, who was a Cajun at the time. Now, I'm just saying to myself, this seems very far-fetched, now as a historian, and I haven't gone back to document any of this stuff. But anyways, apparently they had like 13 kids, and out of the 13 kids that were biracial, half of them ended up moving and passing up north, and a few of them stayed in Louisiana and migrated throughout Lafayette area, Karen Crow, Opelousas area. And my grandfather was, of course, born, and then it just goes off into a whole lot of stuff. So I know that part of that family history. The DeQueer family history and the Conant family history, I do know, they come from the DeQueer. DeQueer means leatherworking, and they were from Belgium, and they ended up settling in the Pointe-Coupee area. And then the Conants, my mother-in-law, and the Cane River, they are descendants and relatives of the Metoyers and the, of course, plantation that Dr. Rousseau talked about. And so there's a lot of lineage, between both of the two. I also do know that Josephine DeQueer is a relative of my father-in-law, and he has done quite an extensive, information about the family and all that stuff too. So all of the history is just really interesting, and I could talk for hours about it, but yeah.
Add to that list of names, the Dupliquet family. Antoine Dupliquet was the treasurer during Reconstruction, and of course related to Mrs. DeQueer in the story of the steamboat story. For information, just for a moment on documents. When I was at Yale, I went through the census, federal census from 1830 to 1870, and took down the names outside of New Orleans of all free people of color and matched them up with the slaveholding census, since technically slaveholding census was separate and apart. But there's lots of inter-family relationships and a lot of interesting stories. One last point. The Metoyer family originated with, if you don't know the story, Marie Therese Coin Metoyer received a land grant, and there's a copy of the document that I have that's available generally. In 1792, she received a land grant from the Spanish government for land in Cane River. And as a result of her hard work and her family development, they basically built a fairly significant, one of the largest plantations in the South. She wasn't the only one. The Ricard family, Madame Cyprian Ricard, bought her second plantation in 1854, and on and on and on. So we can talk about those things at some other point. But thank you for that. Great history in Cane River. Tremendously rich culture.
Okay, I've decided that, they can keep the 40 acres and a mule. I want some property. I want a piece of the Maroney back. And I take some Cane River back.
You want some Bitcoin.
No, I forget about the Bitcoin. I don't want the Bitcoin. And it's interesting because, I consider Senegal a twin sister for New Orleans, and I think there's some other people around here who feel the same way. I'd like to note that somebody mentioned and referred to your presentation as a paper, Dr. Senegal DeQueer. So there are people listening to this presentation who hope that you will do just that, turn that into a paper and let us share it in our journal. And you can go to the website. I know Mitch asked about it. You can go to our website and see thumbnails of our journals. We have a journal, we produce a journal every year. One other comment I have is for the staff, Dr. Williams' staff at the center. I hope we've inspired you enough and getting you excited about the possibility of coming down here to New Orleans. It's a fun city, but we do work, we do serious work, and hopefully this conference can be some kind of a proof to show you that we do serious work and that our organization deserves this kind of partnership, and we'd be happy to make it work for you. I think we have
Liz.
Yes.
Just to comment, because a lot of discussion on Dupliquet DeQueer, referencing that La Creole had a presentation this summer on that based on a story, a book written by Jack Bierman. So I just put the full title as a literary reference in the chat. The Journey to Separate but Equal, Madame Dupuis' Quest for Racial Justice in the Reconstruction Era by Jack Bierman. And we have a presentation on that, the book talk with the author, moderated by one of our members on our YouTube channel. So lots of history was shared already.
So yeah, so Chantel, it's available on YouTube. We have a channel, a YouTube channel, so you could, look at that as well. The whole audience can do that. We've made some new partnerships. I hear that the panel, the attendee from Haiti has already contacted me. I'm hoping that we can get some more conversations going for future programmatic things. Anybody else have any comments?
I have a question for Lynette, because there's a lot of chat going on about just the whole preservation aspect of the 7th Ward, which she referenced, and what's happening before our eyes. So Lynette, can you reference us as far as the organizations in the city of what would be the best, I don't know, to perhaps partner with or relate to? I know there's Preservation Resource, PRC, but anything else? And I know sometimes it's an issue with the schools. Everything is tied up, because I commented that Maurice Couvent School on Parker Street, and I believe Lynette's family was like right across the street, the Dolios on Parker Street, but it became AP Turo School, and now it's just an empty building, but it's neglected. But my question is, any references to preservation organizations that are reputable that we could perhaps connect to?
Yeah, the PRC is the most prominent, and they actually, under Danielle Delso's leadership, they've really taken up the cause of preserving Black places. So they've been really good about it. The 7th Ward had never been declared a historic district. And so one of the reasons you had all of the wanton demolition is that the 7th Ward wasn't protected by any kind of an overseeing body. And we recently got it designated a state cultural district, which is helping, but there's more work to be done in that regard. And it's sort of a catch-22, because you can't become a historic district unless you have the historic buildings in place, and we don't have the historic buildings in place because they were demolished during urban renewal. So it's difficult to meet those national standards and even the local standards because of that. But another group you might know is Nucor. They have a 7th Ward, a 7th Ward revitalization project that's being led by Pam Broom. And she was instrumental in getting that state cultural district designation, working with the PRC. And so you're right about school buildings. They're tied up in a different kind of a limbo, ownership by the school boards and stewardship by citizens, and then the two groups having difficulty working together. But I think that the PRC and Nucor are the ones who are most on the ground actually working in preservation. And by preservation, I mean all of it, intangible as well as tangible heritage.
I have to say this. I didn't read this part of Lynette's bio, but just in case you miss it in the program, in the written program, she has a BA in communications from the University of New Orleans, and she's pursuing a Master of Preservation Studies degree at Tulane University School of Architecture. And we are supporting her in all that she does. And she was named a National Trust Diversity Scholar by the National Trust for Historic Places. And our organization we have inquired and written letters of interest for those major grants that are funded by the National Trust.
Yeah. Which we've learned they're always looking for buildings, actual structures too.
Yes, and like Lynette said, that's problematic, right? But establishing that 7th Ward, and hopefully her presentation, hopefully she's doing a double dip in her presentation and her master studies work so that she can, have some free time of her own. And we're wishing her the best, because I think she's toward the end of her program. I'm getting a message from Catherine Ladner, who's been our liaison with the National Trust, because she does a lot of work with it. And so she's saying, yeah, we're going to continue in that vein. We may be asking for letters of support from some of you if we do go for grant funding. So, and a letter from that place in DC would be absolutely wonderful if we can get that. So let's see, I think we don't have too much time. Anybody else want to take up 2 minutes?
There was one question for Monica.
Right, thank you. Yes. Just really quickly, one of the board members wanted to know how to get started with a podcast. I would always say, take a breather first and ask some questions like, what do you want to accomplish? What's the purpose of it? Who will it best serve? Start to flesh out those pre-production questions first. What's the purpose? Do you want to educate? Do you want to share more information about La Creole? What do you want the podcast to do? And from there, flush out that audience. And then you can start to say, okay, what is it going to look like? What's the format of it? And then some of the other production questions will come into play. But the main thing is, what is this show about? What is this podcast about?
Gotcha. Yeah. 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 Because, it looks like a simple production, but it is not. We've learned that. Yeah.
Especially on the front end. There's a lot on the front end that you really need to do.
Yeah. Okay.
Dr. Rhodes, if I can add a comment, thank you for the program, phenomenal program. I think that there's lots of resources at the state of Louisiana level for everything. I mean, it's our government, even though we have gotten very little as a population from them historically, but they have tremendous resources in terms of documentations that they've collected. I mean, we have a jazz museum, even though it's kind of a lousy one for what we've done in terms of contributing to jazz. I mean, that the state kind of owns, obviously operated in the French Quarter. They own buildings, they have the purse string. And so if La Creole at some point, could have, and maybe the president of Xavier could have a conversation with the governor, that would be, I think, a major opportunity because they throw money away like crazy. I mean, they set up a culinary center, in Shreveport, where we're the culinary center of the country, certainly of the state, but they send $5 million, and I don't have anything against Shreveport, to educate people in culinary arts, one of the programs there. And we just don't get our share. We don't get our fair share, unfortunately.
I have a response to that. That
yes.
Everything in Louisiana is political, okay? And
yes.
we've been knocking on that door, okay?
I understand. That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, so, it's not to say that we won't continue, but it's not something we've ignored. And where the national has given us some attention, has given us some resources, has shown promise. So I don't know, maybe we're just, we're New Orleans. We're not considered part of Louisiana, but
right.
That's my political comment on that.
Understood.
Okay, so there's another question, Melissa. This is in the chat. Anyway, I can't find, y'all are getting all kind of kudos from folks in the chat. I don't know if you can see it, but it's saying wonderful presentations and everything. I think it's time for us to, don't forget the survey, that it will come after the presentation that we have, the musical presentation that we're going to have. I mentioned the number of participants that we've had today. I think I've covered everything. Chantel, our board chair, is going to formally conclude the conference after the musical presentation. And is that it, Helen, Chantel, Pat?
There's some, yeah, I see there's some ongoing chat, but yeah, we could do the music and then maybe revisit.
Yeah, I think we were out of time technically for chat, but we have a record of it so we can address it some kind of way, promises.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Matthews will accompany, Dr. Matthews is at Xavier University, Charlene and Monica. He's also my kid's piano teacher. Has performed extensively as a soloist and collaborative pianist with vocalists, choral and chamber ensembles across the US and abroad. Yeah, I think this is an interesting fact that he served as a liturgical musician for over 20 years and has composed several sacred choral and piano works, including his Mass for Sister Thea Bowman. Y'all know Sister Thea Bowman was a SBS nun who has passed away, but has her own legacy. He holds degrees in piano Pedagogy and Performance from Morehouse College, Georgia State University, and the University of South Carolina. A wonderful person. So he's going to be playing the piano. And Vance Vokerson, when I first looked at that picture, I was wondering, what does he have in his hand? Well, he's got a knife. I guess he's cutting sausage. That's the uniform for the chef. He's a third generation sausage maker. He's also a vocalist, and he's been singing all his life. He's classically trained with Uzi Brown at Morehouse College, and he was part of the Glee Club. Isn't that nice? And he's performed as a member of the Moses Hogan Singers and the New Orleans Black Chorale and Opera Creole. He sings every Sunday at Transfiguration Church, where I occasionally see him, and he's accompanied by Dr. Aaron Matthews. So they're going to sing two numbers. I wondered at first, what are we going to do when he's singing the two numbers? Some of us might want to just listen attentively, but if you want to close your eyes, feel free to do that or turn off your video. They're going to be nice songs, and it might be enhanced if we're not just looking at one another. Okay, Helen?
Hello, everyone. My name is Vance Vokerson, and I'm here today with Dr. Aaron Matthews in accompaniment. And we're going to perform for you today Nature Boy for the La Creole Convention. There was a boy, a certain strange, enchanted boy. They said he traveled very far over land and sea. A little shy, but sad of eye, but very wise was he. And then one day, one magic day, he came my way. And as we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me: the greatest joy you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. The greatest joy you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return.
Got one more song, right, Helen?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vance Vokerson.
Oh, sorry, wrong one.
Our next selection is from Gregory Porter, Take Me to the Alley. Well, they give their houses in preparation for the king, and they line the sidewalks with every sort of shiny thing, but they will be surprised when they hear me say, take me to the alley, take me to the afflicted ones, take me to the lonely ones that somehow lost their way. Let them hear me say, I am your friend. Come to my table. Rest here in my garden. You will have a pardon. You will have a pardon. Take me to the alley. Take me to the afflicted ones. Take me to the lonely ones that somehow lost their way. Let them hear me say, oh, I am your friend. Come to my table. Rest here in my garden. You will have a pardon. You will have a pardon. Take me to the alley. Take me to the afflicted ones. Take me to the lonely ones that somehow lost their way. Let them hear me say, oh, I am your friend. Come to my table. Rest here in my garden. pardon. You will have a pardon. Rest here, lonely one, crying one, lost here in my garden. Take me to my garden, my garden.
Absolutely beautiful.
Wow. I should have went first.
Woo! Okay.
There's a question about who that was again. That was Vance Vaucresson.
Vance Vaucresson. Yeah. Gregory Porter, Take Me to the Alley, a wonderful album. And Nat King Cole, right? And
Nat King Cole, Nature Boy, yeah.
Nature Boy, Nature Boy. Yeah. And they picked those selections, y'all. They picked it. I just want to say one other thing right before we close that, well, Chantel's going to close. Thank you, Chantel. Thank you. And thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
Liz.
All right, awesome. Okay, I think I had something prepared. I just want to say thank you, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure, wonderful discussion. I hope by hearing all of this, you're not only inspired, but encouraged to just share your stories and recognize the worth of them. I've been doing genealogy for myself and my family for about 20, 25 years now. And one of the first things I remember trying to talk to the elders was everything was so shoo-shoo, and what I learned as a young kid, taboo. Nobody wanted to talk. So I kind of lit some flames, and I'm still a little reluctant at times, but listening to you all and hearing your stories and hearing your input is definitely an encouragement. So thank you to our guest speakers, of course, for sharing your expertise, your experiences, and your vision. Again, to the conference team and all participants, members, and visitors for today's webinar event, which again will soon be available to you all who have registered and to our members in a link that's going to follow soon within a week or so. I want to extend everybody an invitation to visit our website at www.lacreole.org. You can find so much information about us as far as our history, membership, resources. We have over 200 members, and many of them joined us today. So thank you to our members once again. And if you would like to become a member, you could do so there at the website. We're a nonprofit family research and educational organization, and we want to do our part to build and maintain legacies and inspire everyone to celebrate the Creole culture and beyond. In addition to our annual conference, this conference, we offer various opportunities and programming throughout the year and genealogical exploration, if you will. So you can find out more about it at our website. Also, seek ways to donate to us and support us there, and visit and follow us on our Facebook page. And you can see past events, which some were referenced, including last year's virtual conference, including public programming that we had free and open to the public this past summer, by going to our YouTube channel. So through Facebook or YouTube, simply search us, because there's many Creole groups out there, but Louisiana Creole Research Association. All right. And I, again, thank you. Merci beaucoup. Oh, I'm sorry, Mark is saying, don't forget to include family legacies on your holiday gift list. That's something special. Our special publication is there. Oh, Pat Schneider is holding up a book. You could find that on Amazon as well. And you'll see it prominent on our website. So take a visit to our website. So much to see. And yes, 'tis the season. Thank you all.
Okay, so I think that officially closes the conference, and hang on for a survey, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Thank you, Helen, on the back end.
Yeah, thanks, Helen.